Chapter 832. For the next 2 days, many big shots went to court with a bag on their back. It was the stomach of a beast that was about the size of a palm and could fit 2 altos. However, it wouldn't shrink and was made of an extremely elastic material. Rinpoche felt that if he used this material to make stockings, it definitely wouldn't tear. The two of them rolled on the bedsheet. Just as they were about to knock on the door and deliver the chicken, they used all their strength. Motherf **, I can't tear it apart. The next day the man went out with a pale face and weak steps. Those who didn't know better would think that he had kidney problems. God knew that he spent the whole night tearing stockings. In the end he didn't even know why he did it. What girlfriend? What love? None of them were as fun as tearing stockings. I digressed. For the next 2 days, many of the big shots went to court with a bag on their back. When they poured out the contents of the bag they found that it was full of precious jewels. They piled up in the hall, and the hall was shining with golden light. Tu Wan, the Minister of Revenue, was a dignified and enchanting mature woman. She smiled so widely that her 16 teeth were revealed. All of these things went into the national treasury. These things were 70% of the gifts they received, and the remaining 30% was considered as a red packet. Even those from the Yun nation who gave gifts didn't expect these big shots to hand over all of them. Their moral awareness was frighteningly high. In fact, if Rinpoche hadn't specifically told the Empress about this matter, and she had opened her mouth to change the nature of accepting bribes into charitable donations to the national treasury, those people wouldn't even have had the chance to give gifts. It wasn't that these people in court had a high moral awareness, but that the Aboriginals simply didn't have the habit of giving gifts. There was only one rule in the minds of the Aboriginals: whoever had the biggest fist was the boss. Moreover, these big shots all had houses and land. Back then they had robbed the entire Hao nation and the Yun nation. Although they weren't filthy rich, their family assets weren't meager. As a result, they didn't have much need for property. More importantly, Dayo was extremely poor and lacking in supplies. They had nowhere to spend their money. From top to bottom, they hadn't experienced the baptism of money at all. Moreover, these people from the Yun nation were like rats. Who could hide the fact that thousands of them were trying to curry favor and give gifts in the city? If he hadn't guessed this beforehand, they wouldn't even have been able to knock on the door. The current situation was a happy one. There was an additional income for the national treasury, and all the big shots took the red packets with a peace of mind. The people of the Yun nation were also relieved. If they couldn't deliver these things they would probably be worried when they returned. The only one who wasn't in a good mood was Rinpoche, the instigator of this incident. Motherf **, are those people blind or stupid? He was a grand prince, but the people who came to him to give gifts were just a few cats and kittens? When he asked, he found out that the same person had given him less than a third of what he had given Tong Jinya. Rinpoche simply didn't expect that when that group of people saw that he wasn't in court that day and that he wasn't an Aboriginal, they would immediately conclude that he wasn't in the center of the court. The Jing tribe is more likable, Rinpoche said leisurely. The Jing tribe's troops gave the Empress a big gift, and the various sects also gave Rinpoche's gifts. Their combined gifts were much more than those given to the Empress. How considerate. Rinpoche's kindness to them wasn't in vain. Lin Mingxing, who was studying the 1,000-character classic and simplified Chinese characters opposite Rinpoche, looked up with doubt in his eyes. He didn't know why Rinpoche suddenly said this. Then he thought of something and looked pensive. School holidays will start tomorrow for 16 days. You don't have to come to school during this time, Rinpoche said casually and went to the classroom to assign homework to the students. He was going to get married soon, yet he didn't forget about his students' studies. Was he touched? Principal, isn't it hurtful to talk about homework on such a joyous day? Du Laolu smiled mischievously as the group of students laughed. Tong Lan sneered. Based on my understanding of Yagüe, things aren't that simple. Rinpoche laughed and said, therefore, in order to celebrate such a joyous day, your homework will be doubled. Also, there will be an extra set of exercises. Are you happy? Is it exciting? Everyone's faces turned ashen as they turned to glare at Du Laolu. Couldn't you accumulate some good karma when you were going to get married soon? After Rinpoche happily assigned homework to the students and left, a scuffle broke out in the classroom. It was a group fight as the other students beat up Du Laolu. If he wanted to fight all the other students it would be fine. When Rinpoche was about to leave the school, Li Fu appeared like a ghost and shouted, Kid! Uncle Li, has anyone ever told you that you are quite scary? Rinpoche turned his head and saw an old face full of wrinkles. It was all thanks to Rinpoche that he didn't know when he would suddenly appear and shout in someone's ear. If it were someone else, they would have been scared to death. Ahem, you talk too much. Li Fu's expression was a little strange. He seemed to be a little regretful and nostalgic. Just think about his past and you would understand. If it weren't for that unknown deity who made him a cuckold, he wouldn't have ended up in this state and would have had a wife and children. He probably wouldn't have been the world's #1 expert. This is for you. Li Fu threw a book at him. Bedroom technique? Rinpoche took it and asked subconsciously. He couldn't possibly be giving him the finger of God at this time, right? Pfft. Li Fu spat like a nail and almost hit Rinpoche's toes. I have gained some insights over the years and I can't pass it on to anyone. I'm giving it to you. Li Fu said rather casually. If it were someone else, they would treat this as a treasure or simply bury it somewhere and shout, "Do you want power? My martial arts, my everything, are buried there." One piece. Although Li Fu was the world's #1 expert, he had never taken his martial arts seriously. He finally saw some hope in Rinpoche. Now that it was Rinpoche's wedding, he didn't have anything good to give him. As such, he might as well give this book that might be buried with him as a gift. Rinpoche quickly put the book in his pocket after hearing this. Although Li Fu wasn't the world's #1 expert, his martial arts were solid. Rinpoche had always suspected that even if he hadn't reached the level of the spirit wheel level, he was close to it. This book of insights could be used as a family heirloom. After receiving Li Fu's generous gift, Rinpoche was in a good mood. He smiled at Li Fu and said, "Thank you very much. I heard that you partnered with someone to sell iron crotches. How's business now?" Cough, it wasn't a big deal to travel everywhere in the past. Now that there are no wild goats or cows around, I have to spend money to eat and make a living. People here really don't know how to respect their seniors. In the past, wherever I went, people would send me good food, drinks, and travel expenses. But here, people challenge me every day, and I don't even get paid for my hard work. Li Fu's face turned red as he complained. Rinpoche felt that the world's #1 expert was doing badly in Lan City. However, who came up with these iron crotches? Presumably it wasn't Li Fu. Well, these iron crotches were sold at Ning Saichen's tavern in front of Jing Street. That guy probably came up with this idea after seeing people coming to his door every day to get kicked. Then the two of them colluded and these iron crotches were quite popular. Although they were called iron crotches, they were actually iron sheets wrapped around ironwood. In fact, it didn't matter if these things were under Li Fu's feet because they would break with one kick. However, Li Fu was also very precise with his kicks. Every time he kicked, the other party's injury would be reduced by half. As a result, these iron crotches were naturally popular. It's good to have a wedding night, but don't indulge in women every day. Li Fu said casually. I'm leaving. He immediately disappeared and Rinpoche couldn't even catch him with his eyes. Uncle Li, the doorman, came like a ghost and left without a trace. Chapter 833. Your Majesty, this is the route to the wedding. There are people intercepting you at these 3 locations and you have to defeat them. Of course, this is just for show. Shi Qing showed the Empress a piece of paper with both hands. There was a big house drawn on it, followed by all kinds of crooked lines and unknown squares. Rinpoche looked at it for a long time and asked, "What exactly is this drawing? Those who don't know might think it's a talisman. Where is the final destination?" "This is the palace, this is my residence, this is Jingyang Street, this is Minister Tu's residence, this is Minister Qin's, this is Minister Tong's. That's the destination." Rinpoche grinned. He didn't know who drew such a good drawing. It would be a miracle if they could understand it. Sir Tong's residence is the final destination? Rinpoche raised his voice slightly. The wedding arrangements were arranged by the various ministers. Now that it was the final stage, Rinpoche came to see how the arrangements were made so that he could have a clear idea. After all, it was a big wedding and he had to put in some effort. However, couldn't they just say that it was the Tong residence instead of such a drawing? If one didn't look at the drawing, it would be quite formal. One look at the drawing and it would be over. This was abstraction. Of course, we can't just let Her Majesty pick you up from Pingle Park and call it a day. Shi Qing stroked his beard and smiled at Rinpoche. After that, Shi Qing explained to the Empress what to do on that day. At the end, Rinpoche pondered and asked, "What should I do?" Shi Qing sized Rinpoche up and said, "Just wait there for Her Majesty to pick you up." Rinpoche snorted. This wedding had nothing to do with him. If Sir Rin wants, you can make yourself prettier. Usually, Aboriginal women look like this on their wedding day. Shi Qing smiled like a chrysanthemum. After Rinpoche stared at him for a long time, the Empress suddenly burst out laughing. Her smile was really like a flower, completely different from Shi Qing's. The Empress rested her chin on her hand and looked at Rinpochen, who was glaring at her. Rinpochen suddenly thought of something. With an embarrassed look on his face he asked, "I will be wearing men's clothes, right? Don't let me wear a bride's clothes? I still have some face. Of course if there is a need I don't have to." Shi Qing looked at him with a strange expression for a long time. He wondered how this guy could think of such a thing. With your figure and appearance, would you still look good in women's clothing? Of course it's men's clothes. Phew. Rinpochen heaved a sigh of relief. As long as she was dressed as a man, nothing else mattered. Shi Qing continued to report to the Empress, including how to set off, how to set up the stage before setting off, and how to return home. After all, it was the Empress's wedding and it couldn't be done carelessly. The Aboriginal wedding was originally a very simple procedure. They would just fight their way to the door, snatch the bride and then leave. Now they had created a lot of trouble. When talking about the interceptors that day, Rinpochen heard the name Hong Wu. With Hong Wu's status he should be considered one of the Empress's people. Now he had become a bridegroom. Initially Rinpochen thought that it would be someone like Tong Jinye who appeared in 2 shots. First he acted like an expert and blocked the way. Then he was kicked into the wall by the Empress. He did not expect it to be Hong Wu. Of course Sir Hong is just putting on an act. Shi Qing continued to blush like a chrysanthemum. After explaining everything to Rinpochen for an hour, Shi Qing finally said, "Also Sir Ren's title of nobility has to be decided. It has to be announced the day after tomorrow." The Empress thought about it for a long time and asked with a puzzled expression, "Why don't I have one?" "Your Majesty is the Empress of Dayo. Why is there a need for a title?" According to the old traditions of Great Xia and the Hao nation, a posthumous title is only given after death. However, the 2 previous emperors are nowhere to be found, and we don't even know if they are dead or alive, especially the first emperor. With his strength, he might still be somewhere, so the previous emperor didn't have a posthumous title. Shi Qing explained to the Empress. The Empress nodded and pondered for a long time. Her gaze drifted to Rinpochen's face, the roof of the palace, and back to his face again. She racked her brains to think of a title for him. Earth Prince, or Ball Queen for short? Prince from another world, or World King for short? This didn't seem right. Given Sir Ren's status, it would be best to have one title. In other words, add one word before the title. Here is a list of titles prepared by the officials. Your Majesty can choose one of them. Shi Qing took out a piece of paper from his pocket. "Why didn't you say so earlier?" the Empress said unhappily. She had killed a lot of brain cells just now but didn't gain anything in the end. "Yi King?" The Empress read the first word on the paper. "Yi" means radiance and brilliance. Principal Ren brought street lamps to expel the darkness, so the word Yi is suitable, Shi Qing explained to the Empress. "Lian King, Jing King, Peng King." Shi Qing explained as the Empress ticked off the names with her fingers. There wasn't much to say about Lian King. Jing King and Peng King were both named after their territories. For example, Jing was Tianjing Basin, and Peng was a part of the Yun nation that used to be called Peng Prefecture. The Empress shook her head slightly. These kinds of titles usually referred to the area as the king's territory. The Empress didn't care about these territories, but she didn't like these titles. Rinpochen felt tired for the 2 of them as he listened. Given the level of education of these big shots in the imperial court, it was really difficult for them to come up with such a list of titles. It was roughly equivalent to asking a bad student to write an 800-word essay on the topic of era. Zhao King. The title is derived from the sun, from the call, and the call is also the sound. Sun refers to sunlight. Zhao means guide, or call. It can also mean lead the light, or call for the light. This title is also very suitable for Sir Ren. This is all right. The Empress pondered for a long time and felt that this was quite to her liking. She wasn't sure about other people. As for herself, Rinpochen dragged her out of the cold palace after he arrived. "Let's do this." The Empress immediately decided. "In that case I'll go and make the arrangements." Shi Qing put away the paper and took his leave. Rinpochen's expression changed from cheerful at the beginning to grave, and then to black. Did Shi Qing really explain the words Zhao King like this? Why did he feel that it was weird? So. It seems like it can also be explained as when to summon. Damn, I knew that anything with the word re in it can't be looked at directly. Your Majesty, I think it's good to change to another title. Rinpochen looked up with an embarrassed look on his face. I think it's not bad. This title is very suitable for you. Do you still think it's inappropriate? The Empress was rather happy. Rinpoche's face was full of vigor. In the end, he didn't tell the Empress about his intention to expose himself. The Aboriginals were a very simple race. At least, the word Re represented the sun. At least, those words and phrases didn't have any additional meaning in the eyes of the Aboriginals. Chapter 834. The first day of the new year was also the day before the wedding of Rinpoche and the Empress. Today, the walls of the palace were decorated with Aboriginal-style ornaments, just like the outer walls of the official residences. Teng Yu's head had been hanging on the palace wall for more than a year. His head had been buried under the palace for so long, but it hadn't been eaten by insects or rats. It hadn't become a skeleton either, but most of the water had been removed, and his face could still be vaguely seen. This gave Rinpoche a clearer understanding of the body of a spirit wheel expert. Of course, Teng Yu was once the fourth most powerful expert in the world and was proficient in spear techniques. His body was far stronger than an ordinary spirit wheel expert's. Next to Teng Yu was a row of skeletons. They were the spirit wheel experts of Tianjing Basin, the two spirit wheel experts who had tried to assassinate Rinpoche, and some other experts who had been killed by the Empress. However, there was something different in the middle that immediately changed the style of the painting. An arrow that had been bitten by insects and rats. The bow was blown by the wind and knocked against the body of the instrument, making a sound like a wooden fish being struck. It was completely different from the surrounding objects that gave off a chilly breeze when the wind blew. It felt much warmer. Rinpoche didn't know who was so stupid as to dig up this thing and hang it on the palace wall. However, Rinpoche felt that this Aboriginal style that was full of horror was even more thoughtless. What Chinese style, French style, British style, Mediterranean style? I only admire the Aboriginal style. Your Majesty's wedding is tomorrow. What's the point of hanging a row of skeletons on the palace wall? Rinpoche turned his head to look at those hanging on the wall and felt helpless. He and the Empress each put on a Calabash Brothers mask and slipped out of the palace. On the first day of the new year, there should have been fewer people in Lan City. However, because the Empress's wedding was tomorrow, the number of people in the city increased. In addition, after the Yun nation was defeated, the goods in Lan City were much richer. At this time, the streets were full of burly men and enchanting women. Among them, the most eye-catching were the two Calabash Brothers masks that Rinpoche and the Empress wore. These masks were even more eye-catching than their actual faces. Most of the shops on both sides of Jingyang Street were now open. Two of the Yun nation's families gave the Empress gifts and took back their original shops. The next day they were arrested and a large sum of money was spent to get them out. Now they were finally well behaved. Speaking of which, the people of the Yun nation might not know which was more important, their heads or their money. The Yun nation was already gone, yet they still dared to sell it at 10 times the previous price. Rinpoche was willing to bet that these two families wouldn't survive for more than half a year. There were only a few shops that had been taken back. Other than that, there were still many shops that were closed. The entrance became a good place for the mountain people to set up their stalls. 7-leaf grass, a 10-year-old 7-leaf grass. It has an excellent effect on muscle growth and hemostasis. It's a must-have medicine for hunting in the mountains and fighting on the streets. This advertisement was filled with the valiant aura of the Aboriginals. Black mountain red flower. Since the opponent is using 7-leaf grass, you should use red flower. I guarantee that you will recover faster than him. Well, in less than a minute, the two shops started fighting. While fighting, they took medicine to replenish their health. After fighting for a full 5 minutes, no one was injured, but the two shops had sold more than half of their medicinal herbs. Scorpion tubes, 30 copper coins for one. High-quality poisonous scorpions. Once stung, you will lie down for 7 days. Inhaling a mouthful of it will make you faint for half a day. Yes, this was selling drugs on the streets. Speaking of which, this advertising slogan was really creative. However, there were quite a number of people around the stall. Clear Spring Mountain's red scorpion leg is even sharper than iron. The price of 7 of them is equivalent to an iron knife of the same size. Rinpoche glanced at the stall and saw that it was selling scorpion claws. The big ones were the size of a short knife while the small ones were the size of a dagger. If they were really similar to iron, they would be good items for the commoners. The city is much livelier than usual today. The Empress said excitedly as she looked at the bustling scene of people coming and going on both sides. It will be this lively every day in the future. Your Majesty, please don't find it annoying. Rinpoche laughed. Now that they had the supplies from the Yun nation, Lan City was the first to prosper. As a capital, the population of less than 100,000, including the farms outside the city, was really too small. Why would I find it annoying? It would be great if that's the case, the Empress said. Although she was wearing a mask, Renbachien could guess that she must be smiling under it at the moment. The two of them walked to the shops of the royal family and saw that there were many attendants of the Yun nation standing outside. The shops were filled to the brim. Whether it was glass products, mirrors, or spices, they were all very attractive to the rich and overbearing local tycoons of the Yun nation. Of course, the price was 10 times that of the aboriginals. The two of them stood outside and looked for a while before walking directly to the other districts. Renbachien sighed as he walked and said, "These people from the Yun nation are really rich. After giving so many gifts, they actually still have money to buy things." The first thought that came to the Empress's mind was to rob them again. Then she realized that the Yun nation was already her territory. This made her feel a little regretful. In the future, the money to build a new city will depend on them. Renbachien laughed. There were many local tycoons in Great Xia, but Great Xia was in flames now. They would wait for them to settle down before robbing them. Of course, they would use all kinds of unique products. Robbing with these things wasn't much slower than robbing with a knife. The two of them walked around the city for a long time and somehow found themselves on a very familiar street. Compared to other places in the city, this small building was much more exquisite. There weren't all kinds of fruit trees in the courtyard, but waterside pavilions. Although it was afternoon, a group of good-looking girls were leaning against the window and laughing. Then they heard Tong Jingye's loud laughter and said, "Come, let me feel whether this body is plump or not. This old man." Renbachien cursed in his heart. He turned to the Empress and whispered in her ear, "Your Majesty, it's Sir Tong." "Yes, I'm not deaf," the Empress responded faintly. Seeing that the Empress didn't react at all, Renbachien picked up a stone and threw it at the window from which the laughter came. Then a woman screamed. Which B** starred through the stone. "Do you want to die?" Tong Jingye's furious voice came from the window and a figure jumped out. Other than that old thing Qin Chuan, there was no one else who dared to throw a stone into his room. Old B** starred, "Today I'm going to..." Before Tong Jingye could land and finish cursing, he suddenly found a figure in front of him. A familiar red dress. A familiar movement. It was still the same familiar formula and the same familiar smell. "Your Majesty?" Tong Jingye was stunned and blurted out. Bang. The speed at which Tong Jingye flew back was faster than the speed at which he came. A few screams were heard in the small building. The Empress floated back to Renbachien's side and turned to look at him. "Ahem, I was just greeting Sir Tong. I didn't expect him to be so agitated." Renbachien coughed and sounded surprised. The Empress stared at him, didn't guess what he was thinking, and continued to walk back. Finally, the two of them turned to the bottom of the clock tower. This place was now a small square with many stone chairs around it. Unfortunately, they were all occupied, which made them feel a little regretful. They originally wanted to sit here for a while. Seeing that the street lights were starting to light up, the two of them walked back to the palace. "Hey, Your Majesty, the wedding is tomorrow," Renbachien suddenly said. Even though the wedding was tomorrow, he didn't feel very excited while strolling around the city with the Empress. Instead, he felt a little calm. It was as if he had everything in the world as long as this person was by his side. All other feelings were gone. "Yeah," the Empress responded softly. "Are you nervous?" Renbachien smiled and bumped his shoulder against hers. "Yeah." The Empress's voice was very soft. "This isn't like you, Your Majesty." Renbachien chuckled. "Why aren't you calling me by my name? Seems to have been a long time." The Empress asked another question. This question had been on her mind for a long time, but she had never mentioned it. Renbachien thought for a while and calmly said, "This has always made me remember that I have Your Majesty, the only woman in this world. No one can replace her and compare to her." "Is that so?" the Empress asked softly. This answer was somewhat unexpected. In fact, she quite liked it when Renbachien called her by her name because he was the only one who would do that. However, this answer wasn't annoying. On the contrary, she was a little happy. Renbachien pulled the Empress's shoulder and stretched his face forward. Chapter 835. Renbachien left the palace before midnight. After all, he couldn't stay in the palace the day before the wedding. His clothes were sent to the Tong residence in advance. Although it was late at night, there weren't many dark spots in Lan City due to the street lights. At this time, all the mansions on Jingyang Street were brightly lit, and servants were busy decorating the walls. There were all kinds of flowers. No one knew when they had brought them into the city. At this moment, all of them were hanging on the wall, turning Beihang district into a sea of flowers. There were 2 sunflowers in the eyes of the skulls. They were probably too cute in the eyes of the aboriginals. There were garlands on the thighs. The spines of ferocious beasts that were a few meters long were wrapped in flowers. There were hand bones stuck on the top of the wall, each holding a red flower in its palm. The white bones danced with the flowers, and the fragrance assailed his nostrils. Rinpoche felt even colder. Great Elder Shurqin got someone to move a rocking chair and table in front of the door. He and Junior Elder Ko Zhihai each held a circular fan and watched the busy people around them. Seeing Rinpoche come over, they smiled and nodded. Ever since the Empress returned from the 60,000 mountains and told them about Qi Ziding's situation, Ko Zhihai had become more well-behaved. Rinpoche cupped his hands at them and continued forward. There wasn't much difference between the front and the back as people were busy everywhere. Tu Wan, the Minister of Revenue, Shen Hua, the Minister of Rights, Zhui Yin, the Minister of Justice, Xiong Yaohe, the great general who supports the nation, and the residences of the 5 protectorates in Lan City were all in Beihang district next to Jingyang Street. This was the core area of Lan City, and almost all of them were busy at this time. Further away, in a more remote area, were the mansions of the various ministers. At this moment they were also brightly lit. When he arrived at the front of the Tong residence, they were naturally making preparations. The courtyard was cleaned, watered, and sprinkled with flower petals. A fierce-looking middle-aged man stood outside the door and laughed when he saw Rinpoche. "Greetings, Zhao Prince Consort." Yesterday, Rinpoche's title as a Prince Consort had been registered and officially posted on the bulletin boards of all the streets. In other words, even though there was still half a day before the wedding, Rinpoche was now a Prince Consort. Rinpoche inexplicably recalled that the person who named him when he was young said that he could live to be 8,000 years old. He always felt that it was King nonsense, but he didn't expect it to actually come true. As for her younger brother, Renwanyin, oh, that was a random name that her father had given him to match her. Renwanyin had always resented this. 1,000-year tortoise and 10,000-year turtle. "Thank you for your trouble." Rinpoche jumped down and cupped his hands. The man in front of her was Tong Jinye's son, Tong Shan, and Tong Lan's father. He was a typical henpecked husband, mainly because he couldn't beat his wife. Tong Lan's mother was called Tai Kuang, a name that didn't sound like a woman's at all. Her father, Tai Feng, nicknamed Madman Tai, was the commandant of the Protectorate of the Northeast. Madman Tai had been called Madman Tai for half of his life. Later, when he had a daughter, he decided to take the name Tai Kuang. "Zhao Prince Consort, you are too polite. This is the honor of the Tong family." Tong Shan laughed. "Please come in and talk. My father is already waiting." Not long after he entered the door, he heard a crisp greeting, "Yagüe." Tong Lan was still dressed in white, but she had a red belt tied around her waist and a red headband tied around her head. Tong Lan had grown a lot taller and was almost 1.4 meters tall. "Here, this is for you." Tong Lan jumped to Rinpoche's side in a flash and handed him a box. Rinpoche took it with a smile and said, "Thank you." This little Lolita was quite cute at times. He looked down and saw 3 words on the box: "Bone Healing Ointment." Rinpoche looked up with a fake smile and asked, "Have you done your homework? Come on, let's hurt each other." Tong Lan's face immediately collapsed and she whimpered, "I spent half a month's allowance to buy it." She rolled her eyes at Rinpoche until her pupils couldn't be seen. Then she jumped over the wall and disappeared. After entering the main hall, he saw a few tall and burly men hanging red cloths. Tong Jinye was sitting there and drinking wine. "Zhao Prince Consort is here." Tong Jinye looked up and saw Rinpoche with a fake smile. "Sir Tong, do you have a toothache?" Rinpoche's smile was almost identical to Tong Jinye's. "Was that stone thrown by Zhao Prince Consort?" "What stone?" Rinpoche didn't understand. The 2 bald men looked at each other and burst out laughing. "It seems like I made a mistake." Tong Jinye slapped Rinpoche's shoulder, which sounded like a wooden stake being hit. "I don't know what Sir Tong is talking about, but I think you must have made a mistake." "Father, I'll go out and get busy," Tong Shan said. Tong Jinye waved his hand and chased Tong Shan out. "Change your clothes first." Tong Jinye led Rinpoche to a room at the back and said, "Everything is inside. Do you need help?" Rinpoche looked at the 2 fierce bald men behind Tong Jinye who were trying to put on a gentle expression. He felt a chill run down his spine and said, "No need, I can do it myself." After entering, he found that there were 2 young women in green who didn't look like aboriginals. Most importantly, their eyes were watery and their cheeks were flushed. They looked shy and timid. What the hell were they doing? I've already made arrangements. Help Zhao Prince Consort put on his new clothes. Tong Xinye laughed at the door. Ren Baqin shivered. Tong Xinye found 2 young women from a brothel to help him change his clothes? What were they trying to do? Wasn't it just throwing a stone? Was there a need to be so ruthless? Believe it or not, Her Majesty would beat the sh*t out of you. Hey, what are you 2 doing? Don't touch. What are you touching? Ren Baqin was nervous. These 2 girls were quite strong and were actually at the earth wheel level. He was stripped naked by the 2 of them without much resistance. The 2 women immediately cried out in alarm, and their faces were dyed with a touch of red. This was the first time they saw something that was glowing. Based on their actions, expressions, voices and hands, it was no wonder that old fool Tong Xinye enjoyed it every day. Fortunately, that old fool didn't dare to go overboard. The 2 of them didn't want to be imprisoned under the palace by the Empress tomorrow. They carefully helped Ren Baqin change into a set of bright red clothes and cautiously retreated to the side. This set of clothes was a bit similar to the court's formal attire, but it was more complicated. If it weren't for these 2, it wouldn't be easy for Ren Baqin to wear it. Ren Baqin stood in front of the mirror and expressed his satisfaction. The main thing was that he was handsome and looked good in everything he wore. Furthermore, he was in high spirits during happy events. Even his forehead was glowing red when he wore this set of clothes. After changing into a new set of clothes and tying a big red flower in front of his chest, Ren Baqin felt that this set of clothes was a hindrance when he walked. As soon as he stepped out of the door, Tong Xinye grabbed him by the arm and led him to the side hall. It's still a long time before daybreak. Why don't we drink some wine? Ren Baqin was shocked. *CK, this is my wedding. You want me to drink? Drinking is a hindrance. Let's talk about it another day. Ren Baqin wanted to slip away, but Tong Xinye's arm was like an iron clamp. Just 1 or 2 cups will do. What's there to be afraid of, Sir Ren? Tong Xinye laughed heartily. Besides, there's still green vine soup. I've already prepared it. Someone threw a stone at me yesterday and Zhao Prince Consort happened to be nearby. I wonder if he saw it? Ren Baqin's mind was filled with 3 words. What a sin. Let me tell you, old man, I won't drink today even if you beat me to death. After entering the room, 3 jars of wine were carried up. Tong Xinye carried a jar in one hand and a funnel in the other. Sir Ren, do you want to do it yourself or do you need my help? 1 hour later. Sir Ren, if this new set of clothes is stained with wine, Her Majesty will inevitably be angry. Why don't you take it off first? Tong Xinye's voice was loud enough to lift the roof. 1 hour later. Ren Baqin, who was wearing only underwear, was dumbfounded. In front of him was Tong Xinye, who was also wearing underwear, revealing his muscles and dancing on the table. Where's the green vine, soup? Coming, right away, ha ha ha. 1 hour later, whoosh whoosh. Chapter 836. 1 comb to the end, 2 comb to the eyebrows. The Empress's thoughts drifted as she listened to the voices. She lowered her eyelids and seemed to be resting. At this time, several female officials were circling around the Empress. Even Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were pushed to the side. Some of them were preparing the bedding in the palace. The bedding on the couch had been changed to red, and the couch was surrounded by a circle of red muslin. In addition, a 100-child tent was hung outside the red muslin, and a 100-child quilt was placed on the couch. Although the fertility rate of the Aboriginals wasn't high, people always had to have some ideals. On the table next to the bed were large red candles with the golden word, happiness. The sky had just brightened, but the palace had been preparing since last night. The entire palace was decorated with lanterns and streamers. After a while, the Empress's fine black hair was braided into countless small braids. At the end of each braid was a small golden bell that made a crisp ringing sound as her hair swayed. Originally, the Empress was going to comb a phoenix coronet, a hairstyle that was decorated with golden phoenixes and jade. However, the Empress chose a hairstyle that was commonly used by Aboriginal girls and decorated with golden bells. This was because the phoenix coronet was often used by Great Xia's noble women on formal occasions. As the Empress of the Aboriginals, she naturally wouldn't choose this kind of hair ornament at this time. As for the hair ornament that an Empress should wear on her wedding day, no one had designed it yet. There were at least 100 braids, and they were tied together with a headband inlaid with red gems to form a high ponytail. Your Majesty, it's done. The Empress opened her eyes and saw the heroic and beautiful lady in the mirror when she heard these words. Your Majesty, no matter what hairstyle you have, you are still so beautiful. A female official pursed her lips and smiled. This was a heartfelt praise. Even women would fall for the empress. Even I don't want to blink when I see you. I really want to see Zhao Prince Consort's expression when he sees you later. Qing Yuan laughed happily. The empress listened to the praises of others and wanted to know what kind of expression he would have when he saw her. She stood up from her chair and gathered a group of people to help her change her clothes. The main color was red, and the robe had large sleeves. There was a golden phoenix and flower embroidered with golden thread, and it looked exceptionally gorgeous. If Ren Baqian saw this dress, he would definitely find it very familiar. It was very similar to the clothes that he had given to the empress. After everything was prepared, there was another round of praises. The empress walked out of her bedroom with everyone following behind her. A table had already been prepared in front of the main hall with an imperial edict on it. Shi Qing, Ko Zhihai, and the rest stood at the side with a red cloth tied around their bodies. The empress walked to the front of the table and looked at Shi Qing with a probing gaze. The other party had clearly told him about the process, but he suddenly couldn't remember. Your Majesty, please wait for a while. Shi Qing smiled at the empress. The empress raised her head and looked in the direction of the clock tower. It was 6:15. That's right, there were 12 hours in a day on the clock tower. 1 hour was equivalent to 2 hours. After a quarter of an hour, the Minister of Rites, Xian Hua, walked to the front of the crowd and said, "The time has come, Your Majesty, please worship the spirits of the ancestors." The empress first lit a stick of incense before picking up the imperial edict and reading it. This was to announce the marriage between the empress and Ren Baqian, as well as the title of prince conferring on Ren Baqian to the ancestors. Xian Hua stroked his beard at the side. This set of seemingly ordinary etiquette actually took a lot of effort to develop, especially in the Ministry of Rites. Other than the Honglu Bureau, which was used to receive envoys from other countries, the Taichung Bureau was like a big cat with 2 or 3 strands of hair and had never played any role. This time they were finally able to do something for the empress's wedding. In particular, the empress was a woman, which was unprecedented even in Great Xia. Naturally, there wasn't much for them to learn from. The time has come, Your Majesty, please set off. Upon hearing this, the empress heaved a sigh of relief. Ever since she was born, she had never been so well behaved. Following which, she became worried because there seemed to be a lot of things to do today. Especially now, they were about to set off for the Tong residence to escort the bride. When they arrived at the palace, there were already 100 imperial guards standing in front of them. There was also Qi Shui with a red cloth wrapped around its neck. It was lying on the ground, bored to death. Upon seeing the empress, it immediately perked up and shook its head. In the distance there were many onlookers. Many aborigines had been waiting in Lan City for a few days just for this day. There were also commoners in Lan City. In the distance there was already a sea of people. When the empress saw such a big scene, she immediately felt a little flustered. In the past, no matter what happened or how many people were in front of her, the empress never cared. However, today was different. Other people's weddings were filled with joy, but the empress was panicking to death. In a flash, she landed on Qi Shui's back, took a deep breath, calmed herself down and said, "Set off." 100 imperial guards opened the way in front, followed by the empress and the people from the Ministry of Rites. "Your Majesty. Her Majesty is here." As the procession moved forward, the voices of the onlookers came one after another. "I wish Your Majesty many children, 100 children and 1,000 grandchildren." It was unknown who shouted this, but immediately there was a chorus of responses. Logically speaking, there wasn't anything wrong with this, but the problem was that their empress was a woman. 100 children and 1,000 grandchildren? 1 child a year for 100 years? The imperial guards who opened the way in front had a twisted expression on their faces. The empress was on the verge of turning from sunny to cloudy. The procession slowly walked more than 100 meters past the crowd. On both sides, a large number of fresh flowers floated down from the hands of the people standing on the courtyard wall. Suddenly there was a loud shout in front of them, "Hey! This road is opened by me, and this tree is planted by me. If you want to marry a prince, you have to defeat me first." Immediately there was a burst of laughter. It was unknown whether they were laughing at the first half of the sentence or the one about marrying a prince. Many people then reacted. It was actually a woman marrying a man. All of them had a strange look on their faces. Immediately the empress's face turned black. "Qin Chuan, you are simply asking for a beating." Without saying anything, the empress soared into the sky like a red cloud and covered the complacent Qin Chuan. Bang! With a palm strike, Qin Chuan was nailed to the ground, leaving only his head outside. "Set off." After walking another 100 meters, there was another person blocking the way. Your Majesty, if you want to marry a prince, you have to get past me first. Zhui Yin, the Minister of Justice, crossed his arms, raised his neck and wore a pair of sunglasses. This time, the Empress went easy on Zhui Yin and used 3 moves to defeat him before the procession moved forward again. Not far from the entrance of the Tong residence, there was another person blocking the way. Your Majesty, you shouldn't have come. Hongwu stood there shaking his head. Not only was he there, but he was also holding a long iron rod in his hand. He had even prepared a weapon. This made many people feel strange. During the wedding, they only exchanged blows casually. Why would they use weapons? Was he really going to stop the Empress? The Empress's face turned even darker. Do I have to retreat? It would be best if that's the case. Hongwu agreed. The Empress's face turned red. This time she was angry. In the past, you told me every day to choose a husband and have children. Now, you are here to create trouble for me? I haven't sparred with the great general for a long time, the Empress said faintly. Hongwu twirled the rod in his hand and said, as long as you defeat me, Zhao Prince Consort will be yours. Chapter 837. In the backyard of the Tong residence, a lady hurried into a side courtyard. She looked to be in her 30s and her hair was casually tied behind her head. Tong Lan could be vaguely seen between her eyebrows, but her face was extremely cold. She was Tong Lan's mother, Tai Kuang, and basically handled all the affairs of the Tong residence. She didn't feel anything wrong when Tong Jingye dragged him out for a drink last night. However, the Empress was almost at the door now, and the two of them hadn't come out yet. She knew that something was wrong. Young madam. 2 burly men were sitting in the courtyard in a daze and quickly got up when they saw her. Not only did this young madam handle the affairs of the residence in an orderly manner, but she was also quite strong. In another 10 or 20 years, she might even break through to the cardinal heaven level and be respected in the residence. Are father and Zhao Prince Consort inside? Tai Kuang asked coldly. Yes, the two of them replied honestly. Tai Kuang walked in with a cold expression. They quickly stopped her and said, Young madam, the minister said that no one is allowed in before Her Majesty arrives. Is that what father said? Tai Kuang raised his head and looked straight into their eyes. Yes. All the more reason for me to go in. Father is acting willfully, and you two don't know what's good for you? Tai Kuang's face was cold as she walked past them. They wanted to stop her again, but a pair of white jade-like palms pressed against their chests and sent them flying into the wall. Tai Kuang snorted and pushed open the door to see the mess in the room. The two of them were only wearing underpants and the smell of alcohol filled the room. Zhao Prince Consort was lying on the ground while Tong Jingye was lying sideways on the table. Both of them were snoring loudly. Tai Kuang gritted his teeth. Needless to say, Her Majesty would be furious if she saw this scene. Zhao Prince Consort would definitely be punished, and Tong Jingye wouldn't be able to escape either. Tai Kuang couldn't understand what Tong Jingye was trying to do. Just to drag Zhao Prince Consort into punishment? Even at the cost of his own life? This was simply a mutual destruction. Someone. Tai Kuang turned around and ordered, get someone to prepare some green vine soup. Immediately, 2 more people will help Zhao Prince Consort wipe his body and put on new clothes. He listened carefully to the sounds of battle in the distance and thought to himself, Great General, you must delay His Majesty for a while longer. A few minutes later, Renbachien woke up with a splitting headache and a tumultuous stomach. He cursed, Tong Jingye, you old bastard, you tricked me. However, even though he was cursing, his voice wasn't very loud. He didn't even have the strength to shout now. He felt like he would vomit if he moved. Even though he had attained the earth wheel level and his physical fitness was incomparable to that of an ordinary person, he would still have a headache after a hangover. He would also vomit if he drank too much. Last night, there were 3 vats of wine, and each vat contained at least a few dozen kilograms. Even if the degree was not high, it was enough to kill him. Tong Jingye lay on the ground and laughed. He looked rather happy. Friends across generations should share joys and sorrows. This old man will also suffer misfortune with you. What else did Zhao Prince Consort have to say? Why isn't His Majesty here yet? Renbachien immediately gritted his teeth. Your death will be worse than mine. Tong Jingye said unhurriedly, if it were in the past it would be hard to say. But today take a guess? Ah! Renbachien was so angry that he wanted to jump up and hammer him. Why exactly? Renbachien gritted his teeth. It couldn't be because of that stone, right? Tang Xinye, this old bastard, had been sent flying by the Empress's kick many times. Tang Xinye turned his head to look at both sides and said, "All of you back off." Then he grunted and said, "Yesterday I was shocked by Her Majesty when I jumped out for that stone and got kicked. I can't stand up after I go back. Who do you think I should look for to settle this score?" Ren Baqian's face turned green and white. "You have one foot in the coffin, you old bastard. I'm still young. According to the lifespan of a cardinal heaven expert, I can live for at least another 100 years. Ren Baqian was speechless. According to his lifespan, this seemed to be the case. Tang Xinye was only over 60 years old. According to his lifespan, he could still live for another 120 years, which was indeed considered young. He turned his head and scolded, "You are on the verge of death, and you still want to live for another 120 years? Bah! Tomorrow I will reserve a piece of land for you under the square in front of the palace." Ren Baqian's phlegm brushed past Tang Xinye's head and flew out. Bah! Tang Xinye spat back. Ba ba ba. Ren Baqian hit him 3 times in a row. "Is the green vine soup ready?" Tai Kuang was speechless as she watched the two of them spit at each other. If it weren't for their status, she would have gagged them. "It's coming. It's coming." After gulping down a bowl of green vine soup, Ren Baqian immediately felt his stomach warm up. It was as if a stabilizing needle had been set up in his stomach, and it slowly began to calm down. "Sir Hong has been defeated. Her Majesty will be here soon." Someone rushed in to report. At this moment, not far from the Tong residence, Hong Wu's long rod had already flown to the side. The iron rod, which was as thick as a forearm, had already formed an S shape. The surrounding courtyard walls had collapsed, and the bricks on the ground were shattered. If the two of them hadn't fought in this small area, the entire street would have been destroyed. Those who knew that this was a wedding, but those who didn't would have thought that it was a demolition. There were bruises on Hong Wu's face and he looked a little lonely. "Your Majesty has grown up and I'm old." Even though the Empress was stronger than him a few years ago, Hong Wu didn't use his blood essence and didn't bring his best bow. He had used all his other means, but he still couldn't do anything to the Empress. He could feel the gap between their strength increasing. The Empress's face darkened. "Great General, are you serious?" Hong Wu shook his head. "I just want to test out Your Majesty's means." Then he revealed a gratified smile and said, "Your Majesty's talent is unmatched even by the previous 2 emperors. I believe Your Majesty will reach a level that no one has ever reached before. This is the prosperity of the Aboriginals. The prosperity of Dayo. Oh, the prosperity of the Aboriginals. Your Majesty. Your Majesty. Your Majesty." The commoners in the distance heard Hong Wu's words and immediately became excited. The entire street was filled with cries of "Your Majesty." The little lowly Tong Lan was lying on top of an intact wall and looking at the Empress, who was receiving the cheers of the people on the street. She was very excited. Her Majesty was her idol and had always been her idol. As for Yagüe, Tong Lan thought about it and felt that Yagüe was quite smart. Even though he wasn't worthy of Her Majesty, there was probably no one else in the world who was worthy of her. He was considered pretty good, but he was a little weak. She jumped back to the courtyard and had to follow the Tong residents to welcome the Empress. The Empress looked at Hong Wu deeply, turned around and returned to Qi Shui's back. The group continued to move forward. They arrived at the entrance of the Tong residence in less than 10 meters. Someone stood in front of the door and shouted, "Zhao Prince Consort, welcome the Imperial Edict. Coming soon." The hurried and panicked voice in the residence made many people feel a little strange. Shouldn't they already be waiting in front of the door? Ren Baqian hurried to the residence, followed by the people of the Tong residence. Ren Baqian immediately saw the Empress sitting on Qi Shui's back. She was wearing a red dress that was different from the usual red muslin. Instead, it was red silk with golden embroidery and looked extremely gorgeous. The Empress's hair was tied into a ponytail. Her eyebrows were like swords, her eyes were bright and clear, and her lips were red like a flame. Ren Baqian's eyes met the Empress's. Looking at her eyes, his heart skipped a beat. When the Empress saw Ren Baqian in red, her eyes were filled with tenderness like water. However, Ren Baqian still had to accept the Imperial Edict. This Imperial Edict was about the marriage between the Empress and Ren Baqian. It was just that it was being read out again at this time. Ren Baqian accepted the Imperial Edict and looked up at the Empress. Both of them smiled. Ren Baqian was beaming with joy while the Empress looked slightly shy. No matter how heroic she was still a woman and had many of the emotions that a woman should have. This was especially so when there were so many people watching. However, the valiant empress had just defeated Hong Wu. Furthermore, she had the might of a great victory. At this moment, the shyness on her face made people's hearts palpitate. Many people in the surroundings subconsciously swallowed their saliva. The empress came down from Qi Shui's back and walked toward the Tong residence. She would spend the next half of the day there, where there was a banquet. She could only return to the palace at dusk. After that, there would be a wedding ceremony, celebration, and banquet. When she walked past Rinpochen, the empress suddenly smelled an extremely strong smell of alcohol. She thought about how Rinpochen came out in a panic just now. She was fighting for her life outside and he was drinking inside. Rinpochen saw that the empress's mood was turning cloudy, so he immediately took the initiative and said, "Your Majesty, Sir Tong has caused me so much trouble." Whoosh. Chapter 838. In the courtyard of the Tong residence, there was a row of tables covered with red cloth. The walls and trees were decorated with lanterns and streamers, looking very festive. However, there wasn't any festive atmosphere in the courtyard at this time. The empress sat in a chair and gently tapped her fingers on the table. Thump, thump, thump. With every tap, the table would sink a little and the ground would tremble a little. "Tong Jinya, what else do you have to say?" the empress asked faintly. His words were calm and his expression was calm. However, no one could relax. Tong Jinya's eyes darted around like a merry-go-round. "Oh, it's a bachelor's banquet. After all, Zhao Prince Consort's status will be different after his wedding, and he can't go out to drink and visit brothels as he pleases. I also have something to warn Zhao Prince Consort. Your Majesty is the Empress of the Aboriginals, and if Zhao Prince Consort dares to flirt, I won't let him off. It's a pity that drinking is a hindrance. Fortunately, nothing serious happened." Tong Jinya spoke slowly at first, but he spoke faster and faster toward the end. He even laughed. Rinpochen was dumbfounded and cursed in his heart. Sure enough, people were forced to be like this. Tong Jinya had invented the bachelor's party in this world just like that? Also, weren't you the one who dragged me to the brothels? Old man, don't you have any shame? Who said that the Aboriginals were simple and straightforward? Is there a bachelor's banquet? The empress looked to the side. If it was in the past, he would have been sent flying regardless of the reason. However, today was a joyous day, and the empress gave him a chance. "No." A loud voice came from behind the crowd. "Your Majesty, there has never been such a thing before. Old man Tong is lying to you." At first, everyone was relieved to see the empress soften her tone, but when they heard this voice, they immediately looked over. Qin Chuan's face was covered in dirt, and he was grinning from ear to ear. "Qin Chuan, you old bastard, what are you doing here? The Tong residents didn't invite you today, and it's Her Majesty's wedding day. How dare you come out to make trouble?" Tong Jinya flew into a rage. "I'm just passing by." Qin Chuan laughed. "Goodbye. Stand there." The empress's face was cold. Everything had been arranged for today. They would set off in the morning and stay at the Tong residence in the afternoon. During this period, only the people from the Ministry of Rites and the Tong residence would be present. Qin Chuan was just passing by? "Give the 2 machetes to them," the empress said coldly. Everyone looked at each other, and the empress spoke again. "Are you still not going? Your Majesty, I've been wronged. If you want to punish someone, shouldn't you add Zhao Prince Consort as well?" Tong Jinya, the old man, still hadn't given up. Anyway, he knew that His Majesty had changed. All he had to do was to drag Zhao Prince Consort into the punishment. In any case, he was a Cardinal Heaven expert and could withstand a beating. He was merely a Kismet Heaven. The empress glared at him coldly. Rinpochen pondered for a long time and asked in surprise, "Your Majesty, you actually know about Gui too?" The teacup in front of the empress flew out. It smashed into Tong Jinya's head. "Take 3 axes." "Your Majesty, I'm innocent." Rinpochen immediately cried out. The plate in front of the empress also flew out. It still hit Tong Jinya's head. Tong Jinya felt wronged. "Why did you hit me again?" 10 minutes later, the empress pointed to the corner of the wall and ordered, "Dig." "Your Majesty, it's a big day." Xin Hua, the Minister of Rites, spoke frankly. "Add 1 more axes." The empress didn't even raise her head. "It's a big day, yet they're still causing trouble. It's really not right." Xin Hua smoothly continued without pausing. Rinpochen thought about it and decided to bury them since their heads would still be exposed. The 3 of them would obediently dig 3 pits. You go down." The empress pointed at Tong Jinya and Qin Chuan. "You are responsible for burying them." She then pointed at Rinpoche. On the day of his wedding, Rinpoche was wearing festive new clothes as he buried people. After burying one layer of soil and compacting it, he continued to bury another layer. After a lot of effort, only 2 heads were left. Tong Jinya sneered at Rinpoche. In any case, you are the one who buries us. Don't be fooled by how happy you are now, but aren't you getting the same treatment as us? After Rinpoche was done burying the 2 people, he saw that the Empress didn't say anything and stood obediently at the side. It was always better to bury less. He wondered if he should take off his clothes when he jumped down later. 5 minutes passed, a quarter of an hour passed. Everyone was waiting for the next step, but the Empress closed her eyes and sat there to rest. Tong Jinya's head was exposed. He first sneered, then looked expectant, then doubtful, and finally felt wronged. Your Majesty, Zhao Prince Consort is still standing there. Stand there obediently. The Empress said coldly. Tong Jinya and Qin Xuan's faces turned green. Your Majesty, this is unfair. The people from the Ministry of Rites who were standing at the side almost burst out laughing. Their faces were all distorted and had weird expressions. Rinpoche looked down at the 2 of them and was in a good mood. He was just short of singing, "We are different." Tong Jinya and Qin Xuan were trying to cheat him. These 2 were really getting what they asked for. At this time the Empress was feeling very depressed. Even though she was shy about the wedding, she was still somewhat looking forward to it. However, a good wedding had been ruined by these few people. Am I usually too benevolent? If it weren't for the celebratory banquet tonight, these 2 people would have been hung from the top of the city wall. On the contrary, everyone else had different thoughts. The people from the Ministry of Rites were happy to see these 2 old fellows looking for trouble every day. It was time to teach them a lesson. As for the people from the Tong residence, they were helpless. On the contrary, Tong Lan was in high spirits. She wanted to have this kind of awe-inspiring power in the future. After staying in the Tong residence for the whole afternoon, Rinpoche stood there for the whole afternoon. Tong Jinya and Qin Xuan were buried there with grievances on their faces. Your Majesty, it's almost time. Prepare to return. Xian Hua came to the Empress's side and said. Rinpoche, who was sitting quietly like an old Buddha, unconsciously shifted his gaze to the other side. The Empress glared at him. The meaning in her eyes was clear. If you cause any more trouble, I'll teach you a lesson. After leaving the Tong residence, the 2 of them started to quarrel again. Usually, a man would hug a woman to show off his strength and snatch her back. What should he do now? Your Majesty, do you want me to carry you? Rinpoche felt that he should show off. He felt that he was good at princess carrying. The Empress put one hand on his waist and exerted a little force. Rinpoche spun 90 degrees in the air and was carried in her arms like a princess. A woman who weighed less than 50 kilograms carried a burly man who weighed more than 150 kilograms out of the Tong residence. Many of the onlookers outside came back after having their meals and cheered again when they saw the Empress. Many people from the Yun nation were also watching from afar. He doesn't care about his reputation at all. What Zhao Prince Consort? Many people looked at him with disdain. Someone smacked his lips and suddenly said, "Why do I feel a little envious?" Everyone looked at him and then moved 3 meters away from him. Although 99% of the men were envious, how could they say this? Chapter 839. Under the curtain of night, the entire palace was brightly lit. It wasn't just the street lamps, but the palace and trees were also full of red lanterns. It was unknown how long these lanterns had been there. All kinds of silk were wrapped around the trees like gorgeous flowers. At this time, there was a hubbub of voices, laughter and cheers inside and outside Zichin Palace Hall. Inside the hall were the Aboriginal court officials, and outside the hall were the people from the Yun Nation and Tianjin Basin. Rinpoche sat beside the Empress, holding a piece of red silk with one hand, and watched Xian Hua, the Minister of Rites, perform a striptease. The other end of the red silk was in the Empress's hand. Following the wild laughter of many burly men and enchanting women, Xian Hua was only left with a piece of undergarment. I couldn't tell that the Minister of Rites isn't an ordinary person. Rinpoche whispered in admiration. This was the first time he had sat up here and looked at the officials below. To be honest, it wasn't very comfortable. After all, every move at the top was watched and he couldn't do many small things. At first he was still sitting calmly, but as the atmosphere in the hall became more and more lively, he felt like there were nails under his butt, and he couldn't sit still any longer. Then the Empress pinched him on the arm, and he immediately sat up straight again. Watch my last dance. I'll let you see my big treasure. Xianhua was a few years younger than Tang Jingye and Qin Xuan. He had thick eyebrows and big eyes and he looked like a decent person. However, his face was flushed and he was wearing a piece of undergarment to show off his muscles. His hands were even grabbing the undergarment. What the F***ck? No one stopped him? Ren Baqian's expression was very interesting. Xianhua was the Minister of Rights. He was usually quiet, but today he was showing his true colors? Great! Many people below applauded and cheered. When Ren Baqian realized that no one stopped him, he immediately considered whether to cover the Empress's eyes. Whoa! Before Ren Baqian could think about it, Xianhua screamed and threw his undergarment into the air. Ren Baqian saw the Empress lowering her head to hide her expression and then looked at Tu Wan and the female officials from the Ministry of Revenue who were applauding and whistling. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It seemed like this wasn't the first time this had happened. Ever since he had arrived, he had been running around everywhere other than fighting battles. He had only held a few banquets, and the finale of each banquet was always Tang Jingye and Qin Xuan's mortal combat. This was the first time he had seen such a grand finale. Wrong, not the finale. After Xianhua jumped down, a few more people from the Ministry of Personnel jumped up. On the other side, after Tang Jingye and Qin Xuan had experienced an entire afternoon and half a night of depression due to Her Majesty's unfairness, they began to rub their palms and prepare for the finale. As expected of the barbarian tribe, they truly live up to their name. Outside Zichen Palace Hall, a portion of the people could see the situation inside. A man at one of the tables chuckled softly. He felt that he had suppressed his voice so low that no one but his companions could hear him. "Aren't you afraid of dirtying your eyes?" His companion whispered. Although the Yun nation had been annihilated, most of the Yun nation's people still viewed the Aboriginals as barbarians and looked down on them from the bottom of their hearts. Especially when he saw the scene in the main hall, he could not help but mock. Although they didn't dare to let others hear it, they weren't worried about it since they were companions. At a table not far away, a man with a wide forehead and slightly sunken eyes turned his head to look, his hand tightly gripping his chopsticks. "Ping Tang, what's wrong?" Someone immediately noticed his abnormality. Most of the people who came this time were from the embroidered uniform guards. Although their positions weren't high enough, they were still allowed to attend the feast as an exception, just like the people of the Yun nation. However, the Jing tribe people weren't as indignant as the people of the Yun nation. On the one hand, most of the Jing tribe experts had died, and the rest had joined the embroidered uniform guards. On the other hand, the things that Ren Baqian had promised them were being realized bit by bit. He didn't deceive them, which made them very grateful and willing to serve him. Didn't the Jing tribe suffer in Tianjing Basin for so many years just to get out? As for the nation, it didn't matter. The Hao nation had been destroyed for more than 70 years, and they had been nominally ruled by the Aboriginals for more than 70 years. Furthermore, the embroidered uniform guards received points for every mission they completed. As long as they had enough points to exchange for the herbs or other items they needed, they would receive them after 2 to 3 months. Nowadays, points were more valuable than gold and silver in the embroidered uniform guards. The man called Ping Tang snorted and repeated the words that he had just heard. The expressions of the others changed. "Did you hear me correctly? My skills are all in my ears. I can even hear the fluttering of mosquitoes and flies from 100 meters away." Ping Tang said. These people of the Yun nation are really reckless. How dare they spout nonsense in this place? Don't make a big fuss. After all, today is a joyous day. If there is any disturbance, Sir Ren will definitely be angry. If we don't handle it well, we might even be implicated. We will follow them in a while, figure out their identities and report to Sir Ren. That will be a meritorious service. An experienced person immediately said. "Your Majesty, it's time." At this time, the hall was filled with chaos, but there was still a loyal official from the Ministry of Rights. Upon hearing this, the Empress and Ren Baqian stood up. "Do as you wish," the Empress said faintly and left through the side door. Ren Baqian naturally followed behind her. When they were outside the hall, Ren Baqian called for a guard and said, "Send the water of life that I prepared." "Yes. Tell them that this is the blood of courage." "What water of life? What blood of courage?" The Empress stopped in her tracks and turned her head to ask. The name sounded very powerful. 96% vodka. Ren Baqian said straightforwardly. If it was given to them before, they might not drink it. However, it was hard to say now. He had been prepared from the beginning, but he definitely couldn't let that old fool Tang Jingye go. He couldn't just give it to him, right? Anyone would know that there was a problem, let alone Tong Xinye, who was a cunning old man. He might as well give it all to him since none of them were good stuff. He didn't force them to drink it either. He just told them that this was the blood of courage. 96%. I remember you saying that the erguoto I drank was 38% and 40%. What's the difference? The Empress asked casually. It's just a little stronger. Ren Baqin answered honestly. Do you have any bad intentions? The Empress looked at him with bright eyes. Ren Baqin understood the Empress and she understood him. He was usually fine, but he would come up with some bad ideas from time to time. Your Majesty, you are thinking too much. This is just a little higher in concentration. If you drink 1 liter of erguoto, 1 liter of this is enough. Ren Baqin said with a straight face. The Empress stood there and pondered for a while before immediately understanding. They drank fruit wine just now, and 2 to 3 liters of it is equivalent to 1 liter of erguoto. If they drink it as fruit wine, they aren't fools? Ren Baqin might have said otherwise, but he thought so in his heart. Especially now that all of them had drunk too much. Plus what you said. The Empress shook her head slightly and rolled her eyes at him. You're too bad. Ren Baqin felt a surge of warmth in his heart when he saw the Empress rolling her eyes. Fortunately, the ceremonial officer urged, Your Majesty, time is up. We can't delay any longer. According to the royal families of other countries, the Emperor, Empress and concubines had their own palace. However, Aboriginal women were fierce, and the Aboriginals had low desires. They had been monogamous since the founding of the country. Therefore they didn't even change their palace. It was still the same couch that was 2 meters long and more than 3 meters wide. It was covered with a red cloth and hung with 100 children's curtains. Not far from the couch was a table with a bottle gourd that was cut into 2 and hollowed out. The 2 halves of the gourd were connected by a red thread. In addition, a pair of huge red candles with golden dragon and phoenix patterns stood on the table. Qing Yuan, Hong Yuan, and several female officials were waiting by the side. The entire palace was filled with an ambiguous atmosphere. The Empress walked back to the palace, slowed down, and her breathing became indistinct. She seemed to be adjusting her mood. Ren Baqin turned to look at her and asked, Nervous? A little. It was rare for the Empress to be honest and tell the truth. Your Majesty and Zhao Prince Consort, please pay your respects to heaven and the ancestors. The ceremonial officer said from behind. The 2 of them lit incense sticks and paid their respects to heaven and the ancestors in the palace. Your Majesty and Zhao Prince Consort, please pay your respects. The Empress and Ren Baqin each held half a bottle gourd while Hong Yuan and Qing Yuan poured wine for them. The Empress held the bottle gourd in her hand and looked at Ren Baqin. After paying their respects, the 2 of them would officially be husband and wife. It seemed like the simplest etiquette, but it had the most solemn meaning. Of course he was willing. However, there were still some feelings in her heart. The person she met a few years ago on the side of the road was now her husband. The affairs of the world were really unpredictable. The same thought appeared in Ren Baqin's mind. A few years ago he almost lost his head. Then he saw the heroic woman in the carriage and now she was his wife. The ceremonial officer stood there and saw that the 2 of them were motionless, so he had no choice but to say, Please drink up. The Empress put the bottle gourd to her mouth, closed her eyes slightly, raised her head and drank the wine. Bitter. Bottle gourd was bitter to begin with. It meant sharing joys and sorrows. After drinking, the 2 of them opened their eyes and looked at each other. The Empress's eyes were filled with tenderness, and it was exceptionally moving to see such a look in her eyes. Ren Baqin squinted his eyes and said, Your Majesty, drink again tomorrow. I will add sugar for you. The Empress immediately smiled brightly and said, Nonsense. Chapter 840. This bottle is exquisite. It's made of glass, right? What's written on it? Tong Xingye's face was flushed as he held the bottle and exclaimed in admiration. He burped and emitted the smell of alcohol. The blood of a warrior? I'm going to have a taste then. Tong Xingye gulped it down, and the strong smell of alcohol filled his mouth. Then he felt like a knife had slid down his throat and reached his stomach, lighting a fire. Pfft, what's this? Tong Xingye was shocked. This couldn't be considered alcohol anymore. It was like swallowing a knife into his stomach. Zhao Prince Consort, you are really ruthless. Everyone was puzzled as they each held a bottle and took a sip. Pfft, pfft. The sound of alcohol being sprayed was endless. Although they were Cardinal Heaven experts and had strong bodies, it didn't mean that they didn't feel anything. Their internal organs were especially soft, and this mouthful was like a sea of fire in their stomachs. One had to know that the alcohol that they usually drank was less than 10% alcohol. Occasionally they would get a bottle of 38% to 40% alcohol from the Empress, which was considered the highest alcohol they could get. It was practically like a burning knife. This was the water of life with 96 degrees of alcohol, which was almost equivalent to pure alcohol. Ah, this is indeed the blood of a warrior. How can a woman like you drink it? Qin Chuan saw Tang Jingye's expression and immediately laughed provocatively. Old bastard, do you want to compete? The veins on Tang Jingye's forehead were bulging. If it weren't for you in the afternoon, I would have dragged Zhao Prince Consort down with me. Coupled with all the previous incidents, this feud couldn't be washed away even with rivers and lakes. You actually have the guts to do that? Qin Chuan's face was full of shock, which made Tang Jingye want to eat him alive. Come. Whoever can't drink it first loses. The onlookers immediately piled the liquor boxes around them and applauded. They watched with great interest as the two of them competed in alcohol. The two of them tilted their heads back and gulped down a bottle. Then, their faces immediately became as colorful as a mill. Today is Her Majesty's wedding day. If you are willing to admit defeat, I will let you off. The colors of red, white, blue and purple on Tang Jingye's face turned red, white, blue and purple before finally settling on his back. Steam almost came out from his forehead as he glared at Qin Chuan fiercely. Why would this old man be afraid of you, you bastard? Qin Chuan also glared at him fiercely. Drink another bottle. Do you admit defeat? You talk too much nonsense. The two of them had been enemies for decades. As long as they met, they would rather die than take a step back. After one crate, the two of them began to stagger. After consuming 2 boxes, Tang Jingye staggered a few steps, turned around, and spat out a mouthful of alcohol directly onto the palace lantern in the corner. Boom. A huge fireball. Everyone, the dozens of bigwigs present, stared blankly at the rising fireball in the corner. What was going on? Someone tried to spit out the wine in his mouth. Boom, another huge fireball appeared. Oh my god, this water is on fire? What the hell is this? Someone spat out another huge fireball. Another huge fireball. Another one. It's on fire? Minister of Revenue 2-1 rubbed her forehead, her eyes blurred. It's on fire. Minister of Justice Zhuo Yin deeply agreed. He knocked his head from time to time, feeling dizzy. Xianhua laughed, ha ha ha. At this time, in a corner of Ziqin Palace, the cloth curtain was already burning. Minister of the Ministry of War Lian Liang was in a daze for a while. He shook his head and stepped forward. Sirs, let me do it. He took a step forward a few meters and slapped with his palm. The wind howled in the air, and the blazing flames seemed to be suppressed. Boom. When the dust dissipated, the cloth curtain, the flame, and even half of the wall had disappeared without a trace. This old man is old and can't compare to the young people. I'm going back to rest. Shi Qing strolled back with his hands behind his back. I'm tired too. 2-1 rubbed her forehead and walked out of Ziqin Palace Hall. A few people from the Ministry of Rites fastened their loincloths and carried their clothes out. In a short while, only Tang Jingye, Qin Chuan, who was lying on the ground and spitting bubbles, and Lian Liang, who was still in a daze. In the bedchamber, the big red tent was tightly enclosed, with only one side open. Ren Baqin and the Empress sat there, and an ambiguous atmosphere filled the air around them. The female official, Qin Yuan and Hong Luan, had already been driven out by the Empress. Although there were still some formalities that hadn't been completed, the Empress was already tired of the cumbersome and useless procedures. Ren Baqin hugged the Empress, placed his palms on her waist, rested his chin on her shoulder, and gently sniffed her cheek. It was filled with a delicate fragrance. Your Majesty, your heart is beating very fast. Ren Baqin felt that there was a small elephant jumping in the Empress's chest. It was jumping rather happily. Ren Baqin felt that it was time for the two of them to get on the bed and proceed to the next step. It was normal for the Empress to be a little flustered, but why was he a little flustered as well? After thinking about it, it was probably because the two of them had been together for a long time. Now that they were suddenly going to take a step forward, it was as if there was a layer in front of them, and they had to break through that layer first. Your Majesty, I learned a martial art in Qingxin Palace Hall a few days ago, and I haven't told you about it. Ren Baqin whispered into the Empress's ear. What is it? The Empress was nervous, and she subconsciously asked after hearing what he said. Then she felt a big hand climbing onto her chest and heard the words, grasping is the dragon's claw. The Empress's body immediately tensed up. Ren Baqin didn't proceed to the next step. He could see that the Empress's body was tensed up like a cat with its fur standing on end. If he moved a little more, his face would definitely be scratched. While whispering in the Empress's ear, Rinpoche pressed his palms on that softness and didn't move at all. He just felt the softness in his palms and the strong beating in her chest. After a while, he felt that the Empress's body had begun to relax. Rinpoche then carried her on his lap and turned her face to him. He stroked the other cheek of the Empress with one hand and made her look at him. Then he lowered his head and kissed her gently. The two of them were immersed in the kiss. From time to time, Rinpoche would open her pearly white teeth and let the tip of his tongue penetrate deep. There seems to be a sound? The Empress raised her head and looked out of the palace hall. The sound seemed to be coming from Zichin Palace Hall. Don't worry about them. What can happen to dozens of Cardinal Heaven experts? Rinpoche laughed. At this time he couldn't let outsiders disturb their wedding night. Rinpoche took off the Empress's red dress. When his fingers were dancing on the white undergarment, the Empress pressed him down and asked, "What do you want to do?" "It's not what I want to do, it's what your Majesty wants to do. As the saying goes, drink the strongest wine and ride the wildest horse. Right now I'm that wildest horse." Rinpoche breathed into the Empress's ear. The Empress subconsciously shrunk her neck, then looked up at Rinpoche and asked, "The wildest horse?" Chapter 841. The red candlelight dimmed the tent. Rinpoche and the Empress rolled onto the bed. Rinpoche hooked his leg and the red curtain fell, separating the inside and the outside into two different worlds. Only a little candlelight penetrated the red curtain. The Empress was wearing a white inner garment, and her braided hair hung down from her face. Rinpoche lifted his upper body, hugged the Empress and kissed her on the mouth. One of his hands was placed on the Empress's waist while the other hand was caressing her back and gently moving around. The Empress snorted, blushed, lowered her eyelids and allowed him to do whatever he wanted. After a long kiss, Rinpoche gently pulled the Empress's collar open, revealing a breathtaking scene. The Empress's figure didn't need to be changed, and it happened to be the perfect size. Her collarbone was sexy and provocative, and it drew a seductive arc downwards. The highest point of her pink breast stood erect. Her skin was as delicate as mutton fat, and it was so fair that it made people go crazy. Coupled with the Empress's shy expression and the scenery between the gaps of her white inner garment, Rinpoche felt as if a fire had been ignited in his heart. In the blink of an eye, it became a prairie fire. This is the most beautiful masterpiece of the Creator. Nothing in the world can compare to it. Rinpoche exclaimed in admiration. He used his finger to gently stroke the upper body of the Empress. When he passed a certain point, she snorted again and a rose-like pink spread from her neck down. The Empress opened her eyes a little, gently bit her lip and squinted her eyes, which were full of temptation. Rinpoche flipped her over and the white inner garment was thrown to the side. Her upper body was completely exposed to his eyes. Although there was only a little candlelight penetrating the red curtain, it was enough for Rinpoche to see everything clearly. Rinpoche leaned over and kissed her from her neck all the way across her peaks and plains. He bit the edge of the safety pants at her lower abdomen and gently pulled it down. Following his movements, that magnificent pink spread all over her body. However, her legs were tightly clamped, making it difficult for Rinpoche to pull her down. Rip. Rinpoche felt that having good teeth at critical moments was indeed a gift. Looking at the safety pants that only covered her thighs, it was even more touching. If there was a god in this world, he believed that the one in front of him was the one. He slowly took off his clothes, revealing a glowing humanoid figure. "Your Majesty, let me show you my shining treasure." As he spoke shamelessly, he kissed her from her lower abdomen upwards. Omitting 5,000 words, their naked bodies were entangled together. One was glowing while the other was pink. At this point in time, the Empress's eyes were almost tightly shut. Occasionally, she would let out a soft hum from her nose. When Rinpoche mounted the horse. Boom. Rinpoche, work hard. The flames in Rinpoche's mind receded like the tide, leaving behind only one sentence, "What the F***ck? Knock on the door and deliver the chicken, but you can't knock on the door." Even if his body was extremely slippery, even if he was covered in oil, his head would still bleed when he hit the wall. Furthermore, it was a reinforced concrete wall. Damn it, don't show your fear. Rinpoche pressed his body on top of the Empress and knocked hard on the door while kissing her. After a while, even if the Empress didn't know much about human affairs, she still sensed something. She opened her eyes slightly and saw Rinpoche gritting his teeth. She bit her lip and suddenly smiled. Then she turned around and pressed Rinpoche down. The two of them exchanged positions. "You are the wildest horse," the Empress said softly with a blushing face. Her voice was very soft, but it unexpectedly revealed an indescribable feeling. Then she took a deep breath, raised her head slightly and put on a superior expression. She looked down at Rinpoche and said, "I am the Empress." Her cheeks were still blushing, and the pink on her body hadn't faded. However, her posture revealed the Empress's temperament to the fullest. With her exquisite body sitting on top of him, he could see everything clearly, adding fuel to the fire in Rinpoche's body. Rinpoche was now confident that he could smash through anything except a concrete wall. Then he was faced with a concrete wall. The Empress bit her lower lip, placed her palms under her body and touched the cannon. Then she looked up at Rinpoche with a seductive gaze. Then her body slowly sank. He didn't know how the Empress controlled her body, but he realized that the door had opened. The Empress's body suddenly tensed up and after a while, it slowly softened. Soft groans that could make one's heart skip a beat came from the red tent. Then the sound gradually became louder, and the voices of a man and a woman intertwined like two people in the tent. However, the creaking sound of the wooden bed was even louder, and it almost completely covered the voices of the two people. Creak, 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 the wooden bed shook violently. Boom. The wooden bed, which was said to be made of ironwood that was as hard as steel, suddenly collapsed. The red tent then completely enveloped the scattered wooden bed and the two people. Qing Yuan and Hong Luan had been standing outside the hall with their ears pricked up. Occasionally, they would hear a few soft moans that carried an indescribable flavor, causing the two of them to blush. Upon hearing this loud noise, they rushed into the bedroom and shouted, "Your Majesty! Zhao Prince Consort! Are you all right?" The place where the wooden bed used to be was now shrouded in a red tent, and they could vaguely see a human figure inside. "All of you! Retreat! Without my order, everyone! Retreat! 100 meters away!" The Empress's voice was intermittent, and it sounded as if she was enduring something. This voice made Qing Yuan and Hong Luan blush spread from their foreheads to the soles of their feet. They hurriedly lowered their heads and ran out. After running out, they shouted in panic, "Her Majesty has ordered everyone to retreat 100 meters away." "Why are you two panicking?" Xinjia appeared in the darkness and asked coldly. "Your Majesty." "Your Majesty." The two of them blushed and didn't know what to say. "What's wrong with Her Majesty?" "Her Majesty is fine, but she wants everyone to retreat 100 meters away," Qing Yuan and Hong Luan hurriedly said. Seeing their expressions and tone, Xinjia was even more puzzled. "I'm going to see Her Majesty." "You can't go." Qing Yuan and Hong Luan wanted to stop her, but how could they? In a flash, Xinjia passed them and went straight to the bedroom. However, before she reached the entrance of the bedroom, she heard a sound that sounded like a cat's meowing. What puzzled her was that the sound sounded like Her Majesty's. When she arrived at the entrance of the bedroom, she saw a ball of red rolling on the ground. A sound that sounded like a cat's meowing and a low growl were coming from it. During this pause, Qing Yuan and Hong Luan rushed over, blocked her way and said in a low voice, "You can't go in." The two of them blushed again when they heard the sound from inside the hall. "What's wrong with Her Majesty?" Xinjia also felt that something was wrong, but she still couldn't figure out what was going on. She inexplicably recalled that when she was being electrocuted, she seemed to have made a similar sound. Strange, Her Majesty's wedding. Her Majesty is consummating the marriage. Qing Yuan and Hong Luan blushed and wished they could bite Xinjia to death. Did she have to make it so clear? "Oh, this is consummating the marriage." Xinjia nodded and listened to the sound inside. Although it was a little strange, it seemed like nothing was wrong. What was the order just now? "Of course it's Her Majesty's. You mustn't go in now," Qing Yuan and Hong Luan said hurriedly. Xinjia was stunned for a moment. Then she thought of something and flashed back into the darkness. A voice came from the darkness, "Everyone is not to go within 100 meters of the bedroom." Seeing this, Qing Yuan and Hong Luan finally heaved a sigh of relief. They turned their heads and looked into the hall. The ball of red was still in the hall, rolling from time to time. Then, a human figure would sit up and lie down after a while. The sound in the hall was getting louder. Clang. Even the table was knocked over. "Should we go and put the mirror away?" "That mirror is Her Majesty's favorite item." Qing Yuan peeked into the hall and asked Hong Luan softly, "If you want to go, you go." Hong Luan glared at her. How could she not know what was important? Not long after the two of them left quietly, they heard the sound of glass shattering from inside the hall. Qing Yuan stuck out her tongue. She thought that the mirror must have been broken. Qing Yuan and Hong Wan hid in the shadows. At this time, the sun was already above their heads, but the two people in the hall still hadn't come out. Once they got close to the hall, they could hear the sound coming from inside that made them blush. Chapter 842. Under the shade of a tree, Qing Yuan and Hong Wan looked at each other and saw the helplessness in each other's eyes. Xinjia landed in front of them and asked, "Is Her Majesty not out yet?" They shook their heads. "If Her Majesty comes out, tell her that the Great Elder is here to see her," Xinjia said faintly and turned to look in the direction of the bedroom. At this time, everyone was outside the bedroom and they could only see the upper half of the bedroom through the wall. If they listened carefully, they could hear some sounds coming from there. It had been 3 days. The two had been in the bedroom for 3 days. It took so long to consummate the marriage. Xinjia began to be curious about what they were doing inside. The food that was delivered for the past 2 days was placed in the sect, but it was brought back in its original condition. Qing Yuan muttered, "With Her Majesty's strength, it won't affect her even if she doesn't eat for a few days," Xinjia said faintly. Without thinking further, she turned and walked outside. "I'll inform the Great Elder." However, before she walked 100 meters, she heard a loud noise behind her. Xinjia turned around and was shocked. The roof of the bedroom was gone. Their original positions were shrouded in dust that soared into the sky. The loud noise caused the entire palace to be in chaos. Xinjia rushed to the bedroom in a few steps, but it was already completely covered in dust, and she couldn't see what was going on inside. "Great Commander!" Qing Yuan and Hong Wan opened their mouths wide and panicked. They finally found their backbone when they saw Xinjia. "Quickly save Her Majesty." Xinjia didn't even look at them and said, "This won't hurt Her Majesty." She then raised her voice and said, "Everyone don't panic." After stabilizing the situation, she slapped forward with her palm. With a piercing sound, a hole appeared in the dust in front of her, but it was quickly filled by the surrounding dust. Seeing that this method didn't work, Xinjia pondered for a while and rushed inside. "Retreat." The Empress's voice suddenly came from the dust, causing Xinjia to stop. The Empress's voice continued, "Call the people from the clinic over." "Your Majesty, are you injured?" Xinjia was surprised. "It's not me. Go quickly." The Empress's voice carried a tinge of tiredness and an indescribable feeling. Knowing that it wasn't the Empress who was injured, Xinjia felt at ease and cupped her hands in the direction of the Empress's voice. She didn't care if the Empress could see her, as this had long become a habit. Then he retreated and sent someone to inform the doctors. Just as Xinjia left, a red shadow pierced through the dust and disappeared into a side hall at the side. At the same time, a voice came from afar. "No one is allowed to come near. Qing Yuan and Hong Wan, bring the clothes for me and Zhao Prince Consort over." Qing Yuan and Hong Wan stuck out their tongues. The Empress's favorite clothes were all buried in her bedroom. Fortunately, there were people in charge of clothes in the palace. They split up to retrieve undergarments and red muslin, as well as Pingle Park to retrieve Rinpoche's clothes. At the same time, he also asked the imperial kitchen to make some food. Meat a lot. They felt that Her Majesty and Rinpoche were probably hungry. It wasn't should, it was definitely. The two did not leave the house for 3 days. When they arrived at the side hall, they blushed when they recalled the sounds and things that happened in the hall for the past 3 days. As soon as they entered the side hall, they saw the Empress sitting there wrapped in a red cloth. The whip on her head had long been untied and was hanging down in strands. There seemed to be water stains and some dust on it. The red cloth that the Empress was wearing couldn't be considered clean either, as water stains and dust were mixed together. She looked a little disheveled, but when they looked up at the Empress, they realized that she seemed a little different. There seemed to be an additional layer of luster on her skin, and there was a tinge of redness in her fair complexion. Zhao Prince Consort was lying beside the Empress with only a torn piece of red cloth covering his lower body. They were shocked when they saw Zhao Prince Consort. Zhao Prince Consort's face was pale, and he had lost a lot of weight. "Zhao Prince Consort, this is..." They subconsciously mumbled. "It's nothing serious," the Empress said faintly as her face blushed again. At this time, Rinpoche seemed to have lost a lot of weight, but his body was fine and even better than before. However, just now, did she seem to have broken his hip bone? Then he fainted. It was unintentional. Her mind was blank at that time. They didn't dare to ask any more questions and put the clothes aside before asking, "Your Majesty, do you want me to prepare some food and a bath?" "Get someone to prepare and leave. Bring the people from the doctor's office over," the Empress said without looking up. After they left, she placed her hand on Rinpoche's face and ran a finger from his cheek to his chin, then to his chest. She didn't know what kind of expression she should make when she thought about the craziness of the past few days. Most of the time, she didn't even know what she was doing. "It's all this guy's fault," the Empress muttered. It was like this. After a while, someone from the doctor's office arrived. It was the chief of the clinic. Without hesitation, he checked Rinpoche's physical condition and reported, "Zhao Prince Consort has a fracture caused by an external impact. This is easy to deal with. In addition, he has a lack of essence blood and an empty sea of marrow. I heard that your Majesty and Zhao Prince Consort haven't left the palace for 3 days, so you have to take care of your health. However, it's strange that people with a lack of essence blood should be dispirited and listless, but I see that Zhao Prince Consort's body is full of vitality and is even better than before. This vitality seems to be pouring in from the outside." The doctor said thoughtfully, "Could this be the legendary dual cultivation method? When I was traveling in the Yun Nation, I heard about the coexistence of yin and yang. The dual cultivation method complements yin and yang, especially for the first time. With your Majesty's strength, if it is poured into Zhao Prince Consort's body." The Empress's face was as red as blood. This person in front of her was full of nonsense. If he was Tong Jinya or Qin Xuan, she would have killed him right now. She hurriedly said, "Cure him and wake him up." After saying this, she fled, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. The Empress felt that she had never been in such a sorry state in her life. A moment later, the Empress was soaking in the pool. The redness on her face hadn't dissipated, and her head was covered with flowers, qi, and energy. "Go to Hong Yuan and keep an eye on Zhao Prince Consort. Inform me when he wakes up." After Hong Yuan left, the Empress closed her eyes in the pool. The feelings from the past few days hadn't dissipated, and her mind was in a mess. Qing Yuan knelt behind the Empress and massaged her shoulders as she said softly, "Your Majesty, Great Elder requests to see you before noon." "I got it. Since that night, how much time has passed?" the Empress asked with her eyes closed. "Your Majesty, it has been 3 days," Qing Yuan said softly. Then she felt the Empress's body stiffen. 3 days? The Empress opened her eyes and asked subconsciously. So much time had passed? At that time, although she could see the light from outside the hall, she had lost all sense of time. Just as Qin Baoquan had said, 3 days had passed. However, her mind was focused on other things just now and didn't pay much attention to this. Yes. The Empress thought about how those old fellows would laugh at her for not leaving the palace for 3 days with that fellow. Immediately she was covered with flowers, qi and qi. Chapter 843. In the darkness it was like the universe. In the distance there was a star that emitted light and heat. Although he knew that he couldn't look at the star directly, Rinpoche didn't feel dazzled when he looked at it. The light only made him feel warm. At this time, Rinpoche didn't even have a body, so he didn't know what senses he was using to look at the star. This was his sea of knowledge, and the way he saw things probably depended entirely on his own habits. He was used to seeing things with his eyes, so even without a body, the angle of observation in his sea of knowledge was still a pair of non-existent eyes. This thought popped up in Rinpoche's mind. Then he began to wonder why he was here, and he recalled what happened before. The Empress was drenched in sweat. At first, he and the Empress were completely driven by desire, but after reason emerged, he began to use the dual cultivation technique that Librarian Lin gave him. Essence, qi, and spirit were completely connected to the Empress. Then they cycled from his body to the Empress's body and back again. Each cycle would take something from his body and bring something back from the Empress's body at the same time. After an unknown period of time, the cycle became faster and faster. Then, his hip bone was broken, and he fainted. Realizing this problem, Rinpoche wanted to facepalm. Damn, what a great humiliation. Breaking my hip bone on the night of our wedding night. Can I still be human? I have a huge physique of 120 kilograms. I have the strength of a bear and the physique of a bear. Well, in front of the Empress, a bear has become a panda. And a small panda. After struggling for a while, Rinpoche suddenly noticed that there were a few more things around him. Around him, there were 3 planets that were orbiting in a fixed orbit. One of them was khaki, one was red, and the last one was half aqua blue. White, green, and khaki were mixed together, modeled on it. It's finally formed. Rinpoche immediately put aside the matter that he was too ashamed to talk about and focused all his attention on these 3 planets. When he focused on a planet, the distance between the planet and it would become smaller and larger in his field of vision. In other words, he was pulled closer to the planet. What attracted him the most was naturally the planet with blue, white, green and khaki colors. The earthy yellow and red planets were missing something, and this one was obviously closer to Earth, which made him subconsciously think of a question. Will there be creatures here? If living creatures appeared in his sea of consciousness, then what were these living creatures? As soon as this thought popped up in his mind, he tossed it aside. The sea of consciousness could have the universe and even planets. It could also have rocks, wood, flames, and oceans. However, it was impossible for life to exist, because his sea of consciousness lacked the most important thing, the soul. Of course, those stones, wood, and flames were completely constructed in the sea of consciousness. They had the same form as the real world, but they were not the same essence. In essence, these things could be said to be made up of his divine sense, not the molecules, atoms, and particles of reality. However, he could use his divine sense to simulate inanimate objects in his sea of consciousness, but he couldn't simulate living things. With these thoughts in mind, he pulled himself closer to the blue planet that occupied half of the planet's surface. Then he got bigger and bigger and he felt like he was falling toward the planet. He skimmed over the ocean, the mountains, and finally stopped above a plain. Then he saw a living creature other than himself. The metal chain laid its body on the ground and lazily basked in the sun. From time to time it would move its head or tail. In any case, both sides looked the same. Its entire body was exactly the same. If the metal chain was here, then there was the golden spear. As Rinpoche was thinking about this, he seemed to see a towering peak in the distance. The golden spear had somehow become thousands of meters tall and was standing there. Rinpoche saw these 2 fellows and then looked around. Most of the surroundings were yellow soil and there were huge trees growing on the ground. These trees were directly composed of the wood element. As a result, there were tall trees on the newly formed planet that were as tall as the 60,000 mountains. Earth, wood, and water were all revealed in front of him. As for fire, Rinpoche guessed that it should be underground. The same was true for metal. In addition, there were wind, ice, and desert, which were variations of the 5 elements. Everything that a planet should have was already here, except for life. However, this planet alone was already a huge surprise. It was an expected surprise. Other people carried a spring and a space with them. Who was as awesome as him? Carrying a universe with them? After that, Rinpoche began to test what he could do on this planet. I said, let there be mountains. Rinpoche's voice rumbled in the sky, and the metal chain on the ground jumped up. One end of it circled 360 times, but it still couldn't find Rinpoche's position. In Rinpoche's field of vision, the ground was shaking and cracking as if the ground was being compressed. A mountain rose with a rumble. I said, let there be rivers. The ground shook again and a huge stream of water sprayed out from a crack, gradually forming a large river. I said, let there be girls. The metal chain scuttled to the air near where Rinpoche was, twisted its slender body, and seemed to be looking for Rinpoche. Well, there really wasn't any. After that, Rinpoche tested all kinds of things. The surrounding landscape was constantly changing and the weather was also changing. One moment there was a storm and the next second the strong wind blew away the rain clouds. The sky was clear again and after a few minutes, it started to snow heavily. As long as Rinpoche wanted to, he could almost achieve it. Except for girls. On a plain, there was a huge stone tablet with the words 9 years of compulsory education, written on it in big, bold and beautiful characters. That's right, I'm that outstanding. Subsequently, stone tablets were erected one after another, forming a forest of tablets. Densely packed words appeared on each stone tablet. If someone were to look at the stone tablet, they would see the words Junior High School Physics Book 1, Junior High School Physics Book 2, Junior High School Chemistry Book 1. The densely packed words were the entire content of each book. In addition to words, there were also drawings. Rinpoche had discovered the first use of this world, a library. As long as it was something that he remembered, he could record it on each stone tablet. In the future, he wouldn't have to worry about forgetting it after reading it. What was that saying again? Boo-boo-gow's lighter, light up wherever you don't know how to. From now on, my mother won't have to worry about my exams anymore. As long as he was willing, he could move all the books in the world here for him to read at any time. After tossing and turning for a long time, Rinpoche began to feel tired like a tide. Then he flew up into the sky and got further and further away. After that, there was only darkness. Rinpoche opened his eyes. This was the feeling of regaining control of his body. He was in reality and not in his mind. "Zhao Prince Consort, you're awake." He heard the cheers of a young girl. Rinpoche turned his head and saw that it was Hong Yuan. However, upon seeing his gaze, Hong Yuan seemed to have thought of something. She blushed and ran away. Rinpoche was confused. What kind of reaction was that? Why was she blushing when he glanced at her? An old man stroked his beard and asked, "Zhao Prince Consort, it's good that you're awake. Do you feel sore in your waist?" Rinpoche felt it and found that it was indeed very sore. "Yes, what happened?" Rinpoche asked carefully. "Do you feel tinnitus?" The old man didn't mention it, so Rinpoche didn't realize it. After being reminded, he realized that his ears were indeed buzzing. "Do you still feel dizzy? Is your body heavy? What exactly is happening to me? Your condition is already very serious." The old man's words gave Rinpoche a shock. "Your waist and knees are sore, your legs are weak, your ears are ringing, and your body is emaciated. Zhao Prince Consort, your blood deficiency is very serious." Rinpoche was speechless. So your kidneys are weak." Rinpoche was immediately unhappy. "Tsuchin, how can you say that? I have practiced virginity for several years, and it has just been my wedding night. How can my kidneys be weak?" The old man sneered, took out a small mirror and shone it at Rinpoche. "See for yourself." When Rinpoche saw the person in the mirror, he was shocked. Was this him? Chapter 844. After the chief of the medical bureau, Qin Baoquan, left, Rinpoche felt the condition of his body, then lay on the roof of the bed. Kidney deficiency was real, dual cultivation was real, and he had gained a lot of benefits from his body. However, these didn't interfere with each other. Although it felt weird, no one said that cultivating dual cultivation would not cause kidney deficiency, right? Cough cough. Let's put aside the issue of kidney deficiency for now. Overall, his current physical condition wasn't too bad. Fractures were fractures, and kidney deficiency was still kidney deficiency. Putting aside the issue of kidney deficiency, he couldn't mention it as it would make him sad. Just now, he heard from Qin Baoquan that he hadn't gone out for 3 days and had gained a lot. First of all, the 3 planets in his brain had finally formed, and he didn't know if it was due to dual cultivation. Secondly, he looked like he had lost a lot of weight, and he estimated that he had lost at least 50 kilograms. However, this didn't seem to be a bad thing as his body had become much stronger. Finally, there seemed to be a lot more things in his body that were full of vitality. They were mixed with his qi and blood, constantly nourishing and changing his body while strengthening his qi and blood at the same time. It was as if he had consumed some kind of treasure. This was also the reason why his physical condition wasn't bad at all, even though he had lost nearly 50 kilograms. He just didn't understand why these treasures could replenish his qi and blood but not his kidney deficiency. However, he felt that after digesting all these things that were full of vitality in his body, his cultivation level would increase by a notch. While Rinpoche was pondering, the Empress appeared in the room. It wasn't until he stopped thinking that he realized that the Empress was staring at him. "Your Majesty? When did you come?" The Empress's gaze drifted away unconsciously. Although she had gone through 3 days of madness, she didn't dare to look at him directly after waking up. Although the two of them were officially husband and wife in every aspect, she still needed some time to adapt to such a change. "You're awake? How do you feel?" It would have been better if the Empress didn't mention this, but when she opened her mouth, Rinpoche's face fell. "Your Majesty, you have to take responsibility." The Empress was speechless. "My back hurts. My hip hurts." "Your Majesty," at that time, "shut up." The Water Empress's face turned red. Her hand trembled and she almost slapped him. "It has already been 3 days since the day of the wedding. I don't know what the outside world is thinking. How do you expect me to face the entire imperial court?" The Empress didn't allow him to say anything, but she couldn't help but speak up. There was a tinge of complaint in her voice. "Do you want me to testify for Her Majesty?" Rinpoche immediately suggested. "What evidence?" The Empress said subconsciously. When she saw the mischievous look on Rinpoche's face, she knew that he was teasing her and slapped his arm. Crack. "Rinpoche, the Empress, it broke again?" Rinpoche was speechless. Currently, he had achieved small success in the yang boosting technique, and was well versed in the horizontal training technique. This wife, when he thought about the 3 days of madness, he immediately felt that it was worth it. "Call the doctor over." The Empress covered her head with one hand and called out to Hong Wuan, who was outside. Ren Baqin didn't feel that it was a big deal even though his arm was broken. In fact, his coma didn't have much to do with his hip bone breaking. Instead, it was caused by this substance that was full of vitality that the Empress brought back from her body and rushed into his body. By the way, Your Majesty, how are you feeling? There seems to be a lot of things in my body now. Ren Baqin suddenly thought about the vitality that flowed from the Empress's body to his body and wondered if she would be affected. The Empress immediately understood what he meant. She calmed herself down and tried to sound as indifferent as possible before saying, "Don't worry about me. My cultivation level is growing too fast, and sometimes it's hard for me to control it. Now it's much more stable. This dual cultivation technique is also of some use to me. When I'm injured, let's fight for another 300 rounds." Ren Baqin laughed. The Empress blushed at first. Then she seemed to have thought of something and cast aside her shyness. She glanced at him coquettishly and asked, "Can you?" Ren Baqin flew into a rage. "Even though I have a weak kidney, forget it, can we not talk about this?" The medicine in this world had miraculous effects. After resting for a night, Ren Baqin was able to limp out with the help of a walking stick even though he still couldn't jump around. He was shocked when he passed by the Empress's bedroom. Were things that intense between him and the Empress at that time? Even the bedroom had collapsed? The Empress's face was black when she returned from court. She thought about how many ministers took turns to advise her to control herself as an emperor and not to be greedy for sex. This made her a little mad. Those people were now hanging from the top of the palace walls. From General Hongwu to the 6 ministers, they were hanging in a row. It was a spectacular sight. It was obvious how angry the Empress was at that time. Furthermore, Great Elder Shi Qing's smiling expression made the Empress even more furious. The Empress was seriously considering whether she and Ren Baqin should practice dual cultivation technique for another 3 days. Sometimes the Empress would throw a little tantrum. Seeing Ren Baqin in a daze outside the ruins of the bedroom, the Empress's anger dissipated a lot. She felt that no matter how angry she was sometimes, her mood would improve after seeing someone. However, Ren Baqin's first sentence put her in a bad mood again. "Your Majesty, was the battle that intense at that time?" Ren Baqin pointed at the ruins of the bedroom in amazement with an expression that said, "Your Majesty, you are amazing." Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan looked at Ren Baqin awkwardly and didn't know whether to laugh or do something. The Empress immediately raised her eyebrows. "In my opinion, this matter isn't simple. This palace was left behind by the Hao nation. Could there be some kind of secret chamber or treasure vault below that caused the hole below and caused the sudden collapse?" Ren Baqin's tone changed, and the Empress couldn't even vent her anger. In fact, what Ren Baqin said was true. Just now he looked around the ruins and felt that many places had caved in. Based on the situation at that time, this was simply impossible. Unless there was a part below that was hollow. However, this palace had been in the hands of the Aboriginals for more than 70 years, and they actually didn't discover the secrets below. The things below the palace of the Hao nation were hidden very deeply. Hearing Ren Baqin say this, the Empress was slightly surprised. Yesterday, when she thought about how the main hall was collapsed by the 2 of them, she felt as if her face was on fire. How could she come over to check? Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan had been circling around the Empress. The other guards were far away, so naturally they didn't discover this secret. After hearing Ren Baqin's words, the Empress flashed to the ruins to check. Although she didn't know much about civil construction, she immediately found something wrong with this hint. "Inform the people to dig this up," the Empress immediately ordered. Chapter 845. The guards in the palace were all at the Kismet heaven level and could lift more than 1,000 kilograms of force with just a lift of their hands. They could almost be used as human excavators, and the ruins of the palace were quickly cleaned up. The broken wooden pillars and the long stones used to build the palace were thrown aside by 2 people standing on either side. The only troublesome thing was the broken tiles, which were the most time-consuming to clean up. When Ren Baqin went to court the next morning energetically, the ruins were still being cleaned up. In the past, whenever Ren Baqin wanted to attend court, he would first wait outside the palace and attend court with everyone else. However, when he was about to leave this time, the Empress asked in surprise, "It's almost time for the court meeting. Where are you going?" "Outside the palace." Ren Baqin couldn't react. The Empress supported her chin with her fingers and looked at him with a smile. "Now that your status is different and you are already a prince, you can come with me." "Is that so?" Rinpoche thought about it and couldn't think of anyone who had told him about this. Even in ancient China, the empress wasn't qualified to attend court. This made his status seem special. If I say so, the empress said casually. In any case, there was no precedent in this area, so what she said was the law. This was the first time Rinpoche followed the empress to the morning court assembly. He was half a step behind and could see the side of the empress's face if he tilted his head slightly. During the court assembly, the empress's face was always filled with indifference. As he walked, Rinpoche's thoughts began to go astray. With the empress as a precedent in Dayo and the difficulty of reproduction among the aboriginals, there might be a female emperor in the future. In the future, he had to remember to leave a rooster to rule the court and that princes were not allowed to interfere in court affairs. After all, not every prince was like him, who was well versed in both literature and martial arts and had no desire for power. What are you thinking about? The empress suddenly asked without looking back. Rinpoche thought for a while and said, "In 10 days we will get married again on earth. I hope there won't be any trouble." You still dare to bring up trouble? Who dares to cause trouble again? The empress's face turned cold. The wedding was messed up by a few bastards, and she still hadn't settled the score with them. Rinpoche smiled. He wasn't afraid of anything on earth as long as the empress didn't cause trouble. When they were outside the hall, they could hear the clamor of the market. In any case, it didn't seem possible to expect these fellows to attend the court quietly and solemnly. It was already good enough that they didn't fight before the empress arrived. His Majesty has arrived. Everyone finally quietened down. The empress paused for a moment. If those people were to see Rinpoche's current appearance, she would be too ashamed to face them. However, he couldn't possibly not see anyone, right? Forget it. Gritting his teeth, he strode into the hall and walked straight to the very top before sitting down. As expected, a series of gasps could be heard behind the empress. A few days ago, Rinpoche looked quite normal. How did he become so skinny after not seeing him for a few days? This caused many people to gasp. The empress's eyebrows twitched a few times, but she suppressed it. There was no other way. No matter what, she had something to do with the fact that Rinpoche was so skinny. She disdained to explain herself. Of course, she couldn't explain herself either. Rinpoche landed behind the empress. Along the way, he received gasps of cold air and winks from the crowd. When he passed by his original position, he paused for a moment, looked up, and saw Great Elder Shi pointing to his side, the position closest to the empress. The number one person below the empress. Opposite them was the great general who supports the nation, Hong Wu, who was neither arrogant nor arrogant. In fact, Rinpoche should be standing in Hong Wu's position. In terms of status, Shi was slightly higher than Hong Wu. However, looking at Hong Wu's expression, Rinpoche decided not to get close to him. Fortunately, the rules in Dayo's imperial court weren't that strict. If they were strict, it couldn't be like a market every day. Rinpoche faced everyone's gaze and then sat down like an old monk. After standing there for a moment, he simply let go of his thoughts and carefully felt the current condition of his body. His body was recovering very quickly. After 2 days, the substances that were full of vitality had only decreased a little. The remaining substances mixed with his essence energy and slowly circulated and decomposed like star sand. These substances seemed to be of a higher quality than his essence energy. Not only were they gradually changing his body, but there were also traces of them being converted into essence energy. The conversion rate was at least 110. During the morning court session, Rinpoche spent almost the entire time standing there and studying the condition of his body. At noon, he went to the ruins of the palace and saw that more than half of the rubble had been cleared. He could clearly see that the stone slabs that were originally laid on the ground had sunk by more than a meter and were shattered everywhere. After another day, Rinpoche felt that his body had completely recovered. Other than losing close to 50 kilograms, there weren't any other effects. In fact, he was even better than before. This made Rinpoche feel restless again. He used to think that the pleasure in bed was limited, but with the empress, it was exceptionally different. The feeling of the fusion of the soul and flesh, the circulation of essence energy in both of their bodies, and the feeling of being connected as one wasn't something that ordinary pleasure in bed could compare to. He couldn't forget about it. However, he still had to drink the tamkin nourishing soup for half a month. It was said that there was a person called Li Xinyu who relied on this soup to indulge in pleasure every day. Then, he died of exhaustion. There was no other way. Even a body made of iron couldn't take it. However, he obtained this soup at the age of 20 and indulged in pleasure every day until he was 30, which could be considered a miracle. The effect was indeed much better than the 6-flavor Rehmannia pill. Just as Ren Baqin was preparing to recuperate in the palace for half a month, the embroidered uniform guards requested to see him. Ren Baqin met them in an originally abandoned palace hall. There were 2 tall trees in front of the hall that blocked most of the windows. The hall was rather cold and gloomy, and the empress had always disliked it. However, Ren Baqin felt that it was quite suitable for a commander of secret agents to meet his subordinates. Subordinate Su Rong Ping Tang, greets your highness. The 2 men entered the hall with their heads lowered and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. This hall made the 2 of them feel cold and gloomy. They stole a glance forward and saw a man sitting high above. His face was almost shrouded in shadows. Although the other party didn't emit any pressure, the atmosphere in this hall made the 2 of them feel pressured, and they didn't dare to act rashly. Ren Baqin looked down from his seat of honor. He had some impression of Su Rong, who was currently a Chinhu in the rearguard commandery. As for Ping Tang, he was a Baihu. Ren Baqin didn't know why the 2 of them were so anxious to see him. Tell me what's the matter? Ren Baqin asked while holding a cup of nourishing soup. Su Rong gave Ping Tang a look, and the latter lowered his head and recounted what he had heard at the banquet in the palace that day. After that he kept his mouth shut. Ren Baqin narrowed his eyes. Should he say that these people were audacious or that they didn't know what was good for them? Not only were they behaving with their tails between their legs, but they even dared to spout nonsense. Have you found out their identities? Ren Baqin asked. Su Rong replied, yes. One is Jiang Biebu, the second son of Jiang Huan, the warlord of Yongjiang City, and the other is Sun Qingwen, the eldest son of Sun Shi, the warlord of Hu City. After that he added, I also have to report to your highness that in addition to these 2, there are more than 10 people who also spoke disrespectfully in private. Well done. Give me the list of names in a while. Ren Baqin nodded slightly. After all, the rearguard commandery wasn't the embroidered uniform guards or the east and west depots of China. There were only a few thousand official personnel in the rearguard commandery, and most of them were in Tianjin Basin. This time they could even find out what the people of the Yun nation were saying in private, which was really good. Su Rong hesitated and said, in addition, there is another matter that involves your highness and her majesty. Even though it's disrespectful, you must know about it. Ren Baqin's expression turned cold. This matter is about Lin Mengxing, who has made great contributions to the Yun nation. Rumor has it that his goal is to get close to Her Majesty. There is no solid evidence for this matter, and it's all private discussions among the people of the Yun nation. I feel that I should inform your highness. Su Rong lowered his head. He thought that since this matter involved Ren Baqin's status, Ren Baqin would definitely be furious. However, to his surprise, Ren Baqin's voice was very calm. Got it? Give me the list of names in a while and continue to do your own things. I will get someone to record your contributions this time. Yes, thank you, your highness. A moment later, Ren Baqin leaned on the couch and gently tapped his temple with one hand. Lin Mengxing. This guy really had foresight and took the initiative to express his feelings to him. However, Ren Baqin didn't know what he was thinking and had to be observed in the future. However, Ren Baqin didn't feel that he would really be threatened by anyone. A woman like the Empress could only love one person in her life. Once she fell in love, she would never change her mind unless she let him down. He looked down at the list on the paper. The names, origins, and what they said were all in it. Ren Baqin sneered. These idiots really didn't know what was good for them. He put the paper in his pocket and sat for a while before leaving the hall. The sunlight immediately shone on him, causing him to squint his eyes. He still preferred the warmth of the sun. It was much more comfortable. Chapter 846. Ren Lijun had been in a good mood recently. Even when he was walking he would hum a tune. At his age, he had long passed the age of knowing his destiny. He did not have many thoughts about the future. All he wanted was for his children to be successful, to enjoy life in old age, to be healthy, and finally to have grandchildren. Needless to say, there was no need to worry about his 2 sons. He did not know how to evaluate his eldest son. Originally, he looked like an ordinary person from every angle. Even when compared to his friends, colleagues, relatives, and neighbors, he was not the kind of person who was amazing. However, starting 10 years ago, he suddenly could not understand him. Now, he was not very clear what his eldest son was doing or how many properties he had. However, he knew that his eldest son owned a 5-square-kilometer property in Wuxia City, which completely belonged to him. Just this property alone could be said to be enough for him to squander in several lifetimes. Now, his eldest son could be said to be extremely envious of his relatives and friends, and they would give him a thumbs up. As for his youngest son, he was also busy with his eldest son, so he did not have to worry at all. He did not have to worry about his two sons at all. All that was left was to enjoy life and be healthy. Needless to say, having a harmonious family was a blessing, not to mention having money. As for health, ever since he started practicing the 15th set of broadcast Qigong 6 or 7 years ago, and with the herbs and food that his eldest son would send back from time to time, he had not even caught a cold these years. His body was even better than when he was young. Now the only thing he was missing was grandchildren. Those around his age already had grandchildren. It would be a lie to say that he was not envious of them. His two sons were quite promising, but he didn't even have a grandchild. Because of this, he worried a lot. After waiting for so many years, his eldest son was finally going to get married. Ever since the news came back, he had not been able to close his mouth. Today he came back from his son's new house. Although his son did not live here, he still bought a house and renovated it just for this day. "Old Rin, you came back from the new house again?" Before entering the corridor, he met the upstairs neighbor. Usually, smoking was not allowed at home, so they all came to the corridor to smoke. They were very friendly with each other. "Yeah," Rin Lijun said with a smile. "When are you getting married?" "In a month." "That's fast. Let me know if you need any help. Don't forget to come to the wedding." "I won't forget." "Hey, one of them is your son, right?" While they were chatting, the neighbor upstairs suddenly said. Even though he had only seen her twice, he would never forget her. That body was like a human bear. It was too oppressive. Rin Lijun turned his head and looked. Sure enough, there were 4 people walking over from afar. 3 of them were tall and strong like moving city walls. The last one was strong but much thinner. Wasn't that his son? "Dad, you're chatting?" Rin Baqin nodded at them and smiled. "You've lost weight. How did you lose so much weight?" Rin Lijun felt a little distressed. His son had been thin since he was a child. It wasn't easy for him to gain weight in the past few years. The neighbor upstairs almost spat. Thin? He was 1.75 meters tall and weighed at least 100 kilograms. The muscles all over his body bulged, making his t-shirt look like it was about to explode. Do you have any misunderstandings about the word thin? But compared to before, he had indeed lost a lot of weight. It had degraded from a city wall to a concrete block. To lose weight. Ren Baqin replied casually. He couldn't possibly say that he was squeezed dry, right? There was no way to say that. "Old Lu, let's go up." Papa Rin greeted the neighbor next door and the 3 winged cavalry warriors before leading them upstairs. "How long are you staying this time?" "I'll stay for 5 days. After that, I have to run some errands and will be back in 20 days. Papa Rin knew that his son had a lot on his plate now and didn't mind. "Where's my wife?" "She's too busy to leave. Come back with me when the time comes." When they entered the house, they saw that the house was filled with red wedding bedding, double happiness, and a bunch of other things were piled up in the living room. His mother and 2 aunts were thinking about what else they hadn't bought. Naturally, there was no more conventional greetings. This time, Rinbachin came back mainly to look at the wedding process and eliminate everything that shouldn't be there to avoid any trouble. Although the Empress said that she had a sense of propriety and etiquette, Rinbachin didn't dare to listen to her. This wedding was completely for his parents to see. He didn't plan to do much and just wanted it to be simple. The guests were also relatives and friends of his parents. Almost everything was arranged by his parents from start to finish. It was the same for the wedding planner, which was said to be quite famous locally. The next day, Rinbachin went straight to the wedding planner, got the process, sat on the sofa, and crossed out the items one by one. Change this one to bowing 3 times. Change it to a fist salute. Remove this one. Remove this one to offer tea. Remove this one where the bride promises to live in harmony with her parents-in-law. Remove this one to offer dates, peanuts, longans, and lotus seeds, and then ask the bride if she wants to give birth. Remove this one to greet parents, guests, and husband and wife. Change it to a fist salute. Remove this one about love stories and truth or dare. Remove this one about guests speaking. Remove this one about the bride and groom speaking. Remove this one about the bride pouring wine for her relatives. Rinbachin was glad that he came to take a look. There were too many minefields. Let the Empress promise to live in harmony with her parents? Put a pile of dates, peanuts, longans, and lotus seeds, and then the Empress will sit on them and ask her if she wants to give birth? Bow 90 degrees to greet parents, guests, and husband and wife? If the empress were to give face and bow to her parents, she would flip the table if she did anything else. What kind of game was this? Truth or dare? Each of them would write down the most mushy thing, the happiest thing, the most unforgettable thing, the most touching thing, the most favorite thing about him or her, the first kiss, and so on. While writing, the two of them had to be separated temporarily. Then, the paper would be handed to the MC and they would have to guess what the other party would write. Asking the empress to play this game in public? They must have lived long enough. However, it would be good to play this game in the bedroom with the empress. He didn't know what the empress would write. Not to mention the empress, even he didn't know what to write. He would play it when he got back. Seemed pretty fun. As for the bride's speech, what if the empress said, "I will grant you the title of king for generations"? Would they be afraid? Let alone asking the empress to pour wine and light the wedding cigarettes for her relatives. Who would dare to imagine that scene? These were all goddamn minefields. One step on them and they would die. Rinpoche wanted to laugh at the wedding planner company. However, he also knew that these wedding planner companies were dealing with normal people, and he was the abnormal kind. There was no other person like him on earth, so they couldn't be blamed. After he finished speaking, the boss of the wedding planner company was speechless. The boss of the wedding planner company had some prestige and was quite knowledgeable. If he met other people, he could still maintain his authoritative status. After all, this was the custom of marriage in this world. However, Rinpoche had great power. Even though he was sitting there and speaking calmly, he was imposing and couldn't be refused. With 3 fierce-looking walls standing behind him, the boss opened his mouth but couldn't say a word. Let's do it this way. You can think of other ways. In any case, don't do anything new and follow the procedures that I approve of. Rinpoche threw the paper back on the coffee table and heaved a sigh of relief. This way there shouldn't be any problems. All that was left was to get a few relatives of the bride. Chapter 847. Sun Qingwen played with a glass teapot and clicked his tongue in wonder. He didn't expect such a beautiful thing to come from this barbaric and backward country. This group of people from the Yun nation had stayed in Lan City for more than half a month. They were most interested in the mirrors, glassware, and spices sold by the imperial family. Although they were expensive, they weren't considered expensive. If the same things appeared in the Yun nation, the price would probably be higher. The only thing that made everyone unhappy was that there were 2 kinds of items, and the aboriginals were only selling them for 1/10 of the price. Even if it was 10 times the price, he still felt that it was cheap. This showed how profitable these items were. These days, there were people who wanted to find 2 aboriginals to buy on their behalf, but unfortunately they didn't succeed. Those barbarians actually didn't want to earn money. It was really hateful. Young Master Jiang Biebu requests an audience. A report came from outside. Sun Qingwen revealed a happy expression. Let him in quickly. Hurried footsteps were heard, and soon, a young master of about the same age and dressed in a brocade robe was brought in. Yongjiang City and Hu City weren't far from each other, so they knew each other. These days their relationship was very good. The young master laughed when he saw Sun Qingwen. Brother Sun, you really can sit still. If I don't go out for 2 days, I will definitely suffocate to death. Sun Qingwen smiled. Brother Jiang has a lively nature, which makes me very envious. Then his tone changed. This Lan City is called a capital city, but in fact, it is inferior to a small city in the Yun nation. There is almost no entertainment in the city, and it is very desolate. Moreover, the descendants of the barbarian officials can be seen everywhere. They are rather barbaric and fight all day long. A few days ago, a few people from the Chen family and the AI family's AI Wenfu were injured by a woman. It is said that she is the granddaughter of Hong Wu. On that day, AI Wenfu and the Chen brothers even went to the Hong residence to give gifts. Thinking about it, it is quite ridiculous. If we didn't need those barbarians? Jiang Biebu snorted with contempt and a trace of anger in his voice. In any case, the Chen brothers and AI Wenfu had the same status as him. When they were injured, he also felt the same way. When they were in the Yun nation, when did they suffer this kind of humiliation? We are under the eaves. Now that the Yun nation is dead, Great Xia can't even take care of itself and can only take shelter under these barbarians. Sun Qingwen sighed slightly. Then he raised his head and smiled. Let's not talk about these annoying things. We will return in 2 days. When we return to the Yun nation, we must have a good drink. There's a little Yang Chun in Maihu City's red-leaning brothel. Her features are quite similar to that one, and she's extremely seductive. She was originally my bud and I've been sick of her for a long time. However, when I saw that one, my heart was greatly moved. When I go back, I must properly torment her." As he spoke, he pointed in the direction of the imperial city. Jiang Biebu revealed an extremely interested expression when he heard this. "There's such a thing? How much imagination?" Sun Qingwen thought for a moment and extended 4 fingers. It's a little low." Jiang Biebu looked disappointed. 40% resemblance? They didn't look alike at all. Sun Qingwen shook his head and lowered his voice. "Who is that person? A famous expert in the world and an emperor at that. How could an ordinary woman cultivate such beauty and temperament? 40% resemblance is already not low. The most important thing is that this person can be casually played with. As long as you imagine it in your mind, that feeling, haha." Jiang Biebu thought about it and revealed a fascinated expression. Then he laughed softly and said, "Zhao Prince Consort really got lucky." The two of them laughed and chatted in low voices for a while. Brothels and romantic affairs were common in the Yun nation, and they were already used to it when the news got out. After a while, Jiang Biebu said mysteriously, "I came to look for Brother Sun today because I found a good place to go." "Tell me about it," Sun Qingwen asked. "There's an alley with 4 courtyards in Lan City, and there's a golden jade pavilion. So it's there. I found out about it on the first day," Sun Qingwen said indifferently. "If it's just a brothel, there's naturally nothing to say. However, there's an earthwheel expert as a prostitute." After Jiang Biebu finished speaking, he waited to see the other party's reaction. As expected, he was shocked. "Earthwheel expert? Isn't that so? It's said that they're the elders of a few sects in the Yun nation. They're young, but they're all geniuses of the generation. In the past, even though our backgrounds weren't low, it was impossible for us to get involved. However, since they've fallen to such a state, they might even be happy to see us." Jiang Biebu smiled. Earthwheel experts could be worshipped even in the warlords' residences, and they had to spend a lot of money to support them every year. Furthermore, these were ordinary earthwheel experts. One had to know that earthwheel experts were also divided into different grades. It was said that the girls in the brothel were all good-looking and young. If they were placed in the various sects, they would be considered geniuses. It was not easy for them to even meet them. Now that they had landed in a brothel in Lan City, this made him think about it. He was willing to lose 3 years of his life just by sleeping with them once. "We're going back the day after tomorrow. Before we leave, we have to test out the martial arts of those geniuses and fight them for 300 rounds. We can brag about it when we go back." After Jiang Biebu finished speaking, Sun Qingwen was also tempted. He laughed and said, "I can't be left behind for this kind of thing." Just as the two of them were thinking about going to Jinyu Building to pick a few geniuses that were usually out of reach, more than 10 aboriginal men came to the courtyard. One of them was more than 2 meters tall. He stood there like a small giant and carried 2 big axes on his back. For others, the axes were two-handed, but for him they were one-handed axes. The burly man stood at the door, grinned, and his eyes were filled with ferocity. He kicked the door open and said, "I'm Hong Bao from the Department of Inspection, and I'm here on Her Majesty's orders to take your heads." Immediately, someone poked his waist and said, "Sir, that's the wrong word." "What?" Hong Bao turned his head and glared at him. "Sir, we're here to capture people, not exterminate their entire families." That person laughed. Hong Bao scratched his bald head and said, "Damn, we used to kill people directly and forgot about this." Then he shouted like a thunderclap, "Capture them all. If they dare to resist, kill them all. Kill them all. Kill them all." The rest of the people followed his voice and rushed out. However, there was still someone standing behind him who reminded him, "Sir, kill anyone who resists." That sounds more imposing. Hong Bao was rather pleased with himself. What did Zhao Prince Consort say? Imposing is the most important thing in this world. While he was speaking, the expressions of everyone in the courtyard changed, and they were so scared that their legs turned to jelly. "Sir, we are envoys from Hu City and are here to celebrate Her Majesty's wedding. What have we done wrong?" The earthwheel expert who was leading the team shouted with a pale face. Chapter 848. Sun Qingwen and Jiang Biebu were carried out of the house like chickens and thrown to the ground. Both of them were shivering. Jiang Biebu shouted, "Sir, you've misunderstood. I'm Jiang Biebu, the son of the warlord of Yongjiang City. I'm here to visit, not to live here." "Jiang Biebu? Let me think. Yes, you are one." Hong Bao laughed heartily. "This will save me some trouble." He then took out a piece of paper and looked at it. He couldn't understand a single word. He threw it to the person behind him and said, "You read it." The person behind him didn't even look at it and threw it to another person. "You read it? Don't you know that I can't read?" the other person scolded fiercely. "Where's little 15? Little 15's wife gave birth today, right? Sir gave him half a month's leave." Someone answered, "Read it yourselves." Another person threw the paper in front of Jiang Biebu and Sun Qingwen. They glanced at the words on the paper and immediately turned pale. Their clothes were drenched in sweat. "Read it." The burly man at the side kicked one of them impatiently. "Sun Qingwen and Jiang Biebu, louder, do you hear me?" As envoys of Hu and Yongjiang City, they privately mocked Her Majesty and the court officials during the banquet. Their words were disrespectful. Damn it, how dare they criticize Her Majesty? Hong Bao's eyes widened when he heard that. He kicked Jiang Biebu's chest, causing him to spit out blood in midair, and his chest caved in. "How dare you? See if he's dead. If he's dead, say that he dared to resist. If he's not dead, help him and let him die quickly." Hong Bao scolded. "Sir, I'm afraid you'll be punished for this." "What's there to be afraid of? How dare he criticize Her Majesty in private? Tomorrow I'll bring some people to wash him in blood in whatever city." Hong Bao scolded with his eyes wide open. Sun Qingwen immediately went limp, and a puddle of yellow liquid flowed down. Initially he still had some hope. At that time it was mainly Jiang Biebu who said it. At most he would receive some punishment and think of a way to remedy it. He didn't expect the other party to kill him directly. Now his intestines were green with regret. "If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have been so talkative." But at that time, the two of them had lowered their voices so low that it was impossible for others to hear them. How did it get out? Not only was his intestines turning green with regret, even some of the young masters who were eavesdropping outside the wall, who had been cautious with their words and actions, were still fine. Some of them who had spoken disrespectfully these days were so scared that their faces turned green. At this moment, a person separated the crowd and strode into the courtyard. "Sir, this is inappropriate." The people outside the courtyard were still wondering who was so daring. When they saw the figure they were all shocked. Lin Mingxing. Why is he getting involved in this mess? Let's take a look. Hong Bao was furious when he heard Lin Mingxing's words. When he turned his head and saw that it was someone from the Yun nation, a sinister smile appeared on his face, and a murderous aura emanated from his body. "Sir, I'm Lin Mingxing. I'm currently working in the Black Bamboo Academy, and I'm your courtier." Lin Mingxing wasn't afraid at all in the face of Hong Bao's murderous aura. What did you say?" Hong Bao wanted to kill Lin Mingxing at first, but after hearing that Lin Mingxing was working in the Black Bamboo Academy, he recalled that he had heard of such a matter. However, he didn't restrain his murderous aura and continued to emit a threatening aura. "Sir, did Her Majesty order you to arrest or kill people?" "No matter what these two people said or did, even if they were convicted, Her Majesty will be the one to decide. A country has its laws and a family has its rules. This is the case for both the Yun nation and Dayo. It's inappropriate for Sir to make decisions based on your personal preferences." Then he softened his voice and said, "Sir, the Yun nation has just surrendered, and the people are in a state of panic. These two people have special identities. They are envoys from the warlords. Although their statuses aren't high, their significance is different. Sir represents the imperial court and Her Majesty. If you kill people at will, it will inevitably cause the people of the Yun nation to feel insecure, and there will be chaos in the end. The statuses of these two people aren't much, but if you kill them at will, the impact will be huge. I'm afraid that neither Her Majesty nor Zhao Prince Consort will be willing to see this happen." Judging from Zhao Prince Consort's previous actions, he has always used coercion and gentleness against Tianjing Basin and the Yun nation, incorporating Tianjing Basin and the Yun nation into Dayo's territory. Although Sir is happy by doing this, it will do more harm than good to the overall situation. I wonder if Sir thinks that your personal preferences or Zhao Prince Consort's plans are more important. Hong Bao widened his eyes and stared at Lin Mingxing as if he was looking at something strange. After a while he said, "Damn it, what are you talking about?" "Sir, you look straightforward but you understand," Lin Mingxing said faintly. Hong Bao suddenly burst into laughter and said, "Although I don't really understand, it sounds very impressive." As he laughed, he patted Lin Mingxing's shoulder a few times with his palm leaf-sized palm. Lin Mingxing's face twitched slightly. If he didn't use medicine, he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to lift his arm for 8 to 10 days. After Hong Bao finished laughing, he turned his head and asked, "Is he dead?" "He's still breathing." Carry him to the doctor's office and keep him alive before sending him to prison. Take the rest of them away." After laughing, he looked down at Lin Mingxing with a sinister smile and said, "Kid, what you said makes a little bit of sense. However, I suddenly don't like the look of you and want to beat you to death." He then laughed heartily and led everyone away. After Hong Bao and the people from the Department of Inspection left, the people outside rushed into the courtyard and surrounded Lin Mingxing. No one had expected that Lin Mingxing would actually stand up for those two people and even persuade this barbarian official. In particular, he didn't back down when facing that fierce person just now, which was even more admirable. Many people realized that Lin Mingxing had a position in Lan City, was also from the Yun Nation, and was willing to stand up for them. Compared to the others, he was more valuable to befriend. Even if he couldn't climb to a high position, befriending him would still be beneficial without any harm. Ren Baqin and the Empress sat opposite each other with a chessboard in front of them. He held the chess piece and racked his brains for a long time before placing a white piece. The contented Empress, who was sitting opposite him, ate a fruit and quickly placed a red piece. Don't ask why there were red pieces. The Empress liked the color red. 5, you win. Ren Baqin looked at the 5 connected red pieces on the chessboard, threw the white piece aside and said, "I'm not playing anymore." The Empress wrinkled her nose, was in a good mood and had a smile on her face. Ren Baqin's flustered and exasperated look made her happier than admitting defeat. Before long, Xenja came over and reported, "Your Majesty, those people have been arrested." At the same time, she handed over a piece of paper and said, "This is from the rearguard commandery." The Empress took a look and threw it to Ren Baqin. Ren Baqin took it, looked at it carefully, dusted it and said, "This Lin Mingxing is quite interesting. Hong Bao is too daring. I ordered him to arrest them but he actually dared to kill them." The Empress was concerned about another matter. Ren Baqin laughed and said, "It's also because your Majesty holds a high position in his heart and can't stand others speaking ill of you. Even so, he can't be punished." The Empress said. Ren Baqin was slightly curious and asked, "What is your Majesty going to do?" The Empress thought for a while and said, "He will be fined half a year's salary." Ren Baqin nodded. This was a punishment that wasn't too light nor too heavy. Reward him with another 1,000 taels of silver. At least I like his way of thinking. The Empress said again. Hong Bao's annual salary is only 800 taels of silver, but he still earned it. Your Majesty, are you going to punish him or reward him? Ren Baqin laughed. The Empress blinked and asked, "Don't you always tell me to be fair in rewards and punishments?" Ren Baqin was stunned and didn't pay attention to what the Empress said. Instead, he was attracted by her playful look when she blinked. He leaned over and gently kissed her eyelids. Qing Yuan and Hong Wan were used to this and didn't mind. Both of them had seen even more shameless things. On the contrary, Xenja's eyes lit up behind her glasses. "Your Majesty, the original location of the palace has been cleared and the cause of the collapse has been found. Let's go and take a look." When Ren Baqin and the Empress arrived, they saw that the original location of the palace had been cleared for 7 meters. There were holes that were half a meter in diameter on the earthen wall at the edge of the palace. There seemed to be at least a dozen of them around the palace. The two of them were surprised at first and then their faces lit up. There was only one thing in the palace that liked to dig holes like this: the Roaring Emperor. No one knew when that fellow had dug so many holes under the bedchamber that it looked like a sieve. Of course, these holes were 5 meters below the surface, which meant that they were dug under the foundation. If there were no accidents, it probably wouldn't collapse for decades. It was somewhat far-fetched to say that these holes were the cause of the palace's collapse. However, the Empress didn't care whether it was far-fetched or not. If it was said that it was done, then it was done. Your Majesty, the palace collapsed because of these holes. However, I discovered something just now. There is a layer of stone below with traces of artificial carvings. It is very likely that there is a secret chamber below. Dig it, the Empress immediately ordered. There was actually a secret chamber under the palace, which made Ren Baqin and the Empress curious as to what was down there. Ren Baqin casually ordered, "Capture the Roaring Emperor." Chapter 849. Speaking of which, the Roaring Emperor wasn't weak. Although it was only at the man-wheel level and relied entirely on its roar, an earth-wheel expert would faint for a long time with its roar. Ordinary people would be roared to death. However, it was like a domesticated dog that naturally liked to please people. "Tie it up, just tie it up here." Ren Baqin instructed the guards to tie the Roaring Emperor to a rockery that was as tall as a human. It stared at the two guards and allowed them to tie it to the rock. Although it struggled a little, its strength was no different from that of a baby in front of the guards. It simply showed an extremely flattering expression and almost stuck out its tongue. "Gag its mouth," Ren-Ba-Chen said again. After the guards gag its mouth, he squatted in front of it with a kind smile and asked, "Do you know what you have done wrong?" The roaring emperor was at a loss. "Were you the one who dug the tunnels under the palace?" Ren-Ba-Chen continued to smile kindly. It would be fine if the tunnels were under the palace, but the problem was that the roaring emperor and the crow general were more than 500 meters away from the palace in a straight line. It was unknown how many palace halls there were in between. Furthermore, there were dozens of holes in the walls around the palace. It was estimated that the entire palace was like a sieve. If this was done by a human, even 9 generations of the culprit wouldn't be enough to punish them. The roaring emperor continued to be at a loss. "If you don't shake your head, it means that you agree. Bring me the scissors." Ren-Ba-Chen took the scissors and gestured at the roaring emperor's little d*ck. "Do you know what will happen if you cut this off?" The roaring emperor's flattering expression suddenly froze, and its eyes widened as if it had seen something extremely terrifying. "You will no longer be troubled by your estrus period. Happy?" The roaring emperor struggled frantically with fear in its eyes. Ren-Ba-Chen slapped the scissors on the roaring emperor's penis again and again. He slapped it a dozen times in a row, pointed at the hole in the wall and asked, "Are you still going to dig a hole under the palace?" The roaring emperor nodded frantically. "Oh, your d*ck is valuable, but digging holes is even more valuable, right?" Ren-Ba-Chen smiled brightly and placed the blade of the scissors on the roaring emperor's d*ck. The roaring emperor's movements froze for a moment, then he shook his head frantically. Ren-Ba-Chen didn't want to do anything to the roaring emperor. He flicked its little d*ck a few times and scared it before letting it go. As soon as the roaring emperor landed on the ground, it instinctively wanted to dig a hole to escape. However, its tail was stepped on. She turned around and saw Ren-Ba-Chen looking at her with a kind face. A fawning smile subconsciously appeared on his face. After being flicked dozens of times more, the roaring emperor looked at its own d*ck, wanting to cry but having no tears. After confirming that it was only a little swollen, it did not make another hole this time. Instead, it ran away like a wisp of smoke. Ren-Ba-Chen shook his head slightly. This guy was too fast at digging. The moment he landed, he had already dug a hole that was 1/2 meter in diameter and 1/2 meter in depth. The Empress was still staring at the excavation site. At this moment, a corner of the excavation site had already been cleared. 9 meters below the original bedroom, there was a piece of grayish-white rock. The surface of the rock was flat, and it could be confirmed that it was created by humans. He reckoned that there might be some sort of secret room under the rock. At this time, they were expanding the excavation area to search for an entrance. He walked to the Empress's side and said, "Your Majesty, we can start preparing the new palace." The Empress tilted her head and looked at him. "Your Majesty, you don't want the palace to collapse one day, right?" Ren-Ba-Chen smiled bitterly. Currently, the bottom of the palace was like a sieve. It might collapse one day if there was a heavy rain. If a large area of the palace collapsed one day, one could imagine how great the impact would be. At that time, rumors would spread everywhere and there would definitely be a big mess. As for plugging the holes under the palace, Ren-Ba-Chen did not even think about it. They would have to dig up the entire palace, which wasn't much easier than rebuilding a palace. Furthermore, they already had plans to rebuild the capital and build a modern capital. They originally planned to build it after the roads were repaired, but now they could prepare ahead of time. When the Empress heard what Ren-Ba-Chen said, she immediately recalled the incident where the two of them fooled around until the bedroom collapsed. Her face looked as if it was dripping blood. Her small fists hammered Ren-Ba-Chen's chest. In response, Ren-Ba-Chen was sent flying. He directly crashed into a tree that was as thick as the mouth of a bowl, causing a rain of petals to fill the sky. The cleanup work continued for another day. After clearing one round along the earthen wall, they realized that the area of the rock underneath was actually larger than the bedroom. In the end, the Empress simply resorted to violent means. She directly punched down and directly opened a skylight. With one punch, the Empress smashed a huge rock with a radius of 2 meters, revealing a passage that was 4 to 5 meters tall. The passage was actually paved with white jade, and at the same time, a dusty smell assailed their nostrils. "Your Majesty, this place has been sealed for an unknown period of time. The air is so turbid that people can't go down. We have to leave it here for at least a few hours." Ren-Ba-Chen stopped the Empress, who immediately wanted to go down and take a look. Although they could also put candles down to see how the oxygen was, Rinpoche felt that the smell would definitely be bad after being sealed for an unknown period of time. In any case, it was just here and wouldn't run away. That's settled then, the Empress immediately said. After another day, there were more than 20 people standing in the courtyard of the former sleeping quarters. Not only were the Empress, Rinpoche and Xinjia here, but even Tang Xinye was here. There were also a few officials from the Ministry of Works, and the rest were palace guards. Take a torch and go down. If it's extinguished, come back immediately, Rinpoche instructed a few guards. I didn't expect Zhao Prince Consort to know about this. Tang Xinye was slightly surprised. If it weren't for the people in the Ministry of Works who specialize in this matter, I wouldn't even know about this. How did Zhao Prince Consort know about it? Rinpoche rolled his eyes. This was common knowledge, all right? Even a 3-year-old knew. Your Majesty, Zhao Prince Consort, Minister sir, we will go down first. 2 officials from the Ministry of Works cupped their hands and jumped down. The jump to the bottom was about 6 to 7 meters high, but it wasn't a problem for them. They first moved the gravel to one side, lit up the torches, and then began to advance toward the north and south ends. Soon after, the Empress, Rinpoche, and the others jumped into the passage one after another and looked around. The passage was about 4 meters high. The walls on both sides were made of the same material as the huge rocks above, but they were polished and smoother. Rinpoche bent over and touched the ground. It was warm and delicate and he could see the texture in the light. He immediately exclaimed, "It's indeed white jade. How extravagant. Was this built by the Hao nation?" This passage was about 3 meters wide. Both ends were covered by darkness, and it was impossible to see how far it went. Just the value of this white jade alone was very high. This was real jade, not marble like white marble. Even if it was of inferior quality, such a large piece of jade was still very valuable. Furthermore, even though Rinpoche didn't know much about jade, the jade road under his feet was white and flawless. It was glossy, soft, and exquisite to the touch. It definitely wasn't inferior jade. Rinpoche didn't know how they found so much white jade. I didn't find any records of this. Tang Xinye shook his head. After finding out about the situation here last night, he sent people to Qingxin Palace Hall to search for the books left behind by the Hao nation, but to no avail. Before the establishment of the Hao nation, there was a Jiang nation here. Perhaps it was established by the Jiang nation, an official from the Ministry of Works guessed. Rinpoche looked at the Empress's thoughtful expression and immediately asked, "Your Majesty, what do you know? Didn't you say yesterday that you wanted to rebuild the palace? I want to use this white jade to build a palace." Rebuild the palace? Tang Xinye was shocked. Rebuilding such a palace required a lot of manpower and material resources, and the entire national treasury of Dayo might not even be enough for it in a year. Now that the Yun nation had just been conquered, more than half of the aboriginals were still poor, and they actually wanted to rebuild the palace? Let's talk about this later. Rinpoche knew what Tang Xinye was thinking by looking at his expression and gave him a look. Seeing Rinpoche's look, Tang Xinye knew that there must be something going on. Furthermore, the Empress wasn't an extravagant person, and this wasn't the right time to ask questions. Chapter 850. 2 guards and an official from the Ministry of Works were holding torches and looking at the drawings on the wall. When Rinpoche and the Empress came over, the 3 of them gave way and said, "Your Majesty, it's here." Then they waved the torch forward and said, "It's all the way to the front." Rinpoche, the Empress and the rest stopped and looked up. They saw that the drawings on the wall were about half an inch deep and had smooth edges. Tang Xinye traced the markings with his finger and said, "It was carved by a finger. The finger is about 30% narrower than mine, and it was drawn by someone other than the Aboriginals." This wasn't surprising. After all, the Aboriginals had only left the 100,000 Mountains 70 years ago. The construction of this place was at least in the early and middle period of the Hao nation, perhaps even longer than that. However, there was nothing to prove the time. This place had been covered in dust for too long, and it was hard to tell whether it had been 300, 500, or even 1,000 years. Continue to look ahead. After instructing the official from the Ministry of Works and the 2 guards, he looked up at the mural. At first glance, it looked like a child's graffiti. There were small holes, arcs, and irregular patterns all over the wall. A thin line meandered from the beginning all the way to a place that couldn't be seen. Everything on the wall was messy and irregular. Rather than calling it a mural, it would be better to say that it was scratched by a crazy person. However, upon closer inspection, it seemed a little different. The Empress frowned for a long time before suddenly relaxing and asking softly, "What does this look like?" Nizi. Two voices sounded at the same time. Thump. The Empress appeared beside Tong Jingye in an instant and pressed his bald head to the ground. His entire head was pressed into the ground and the ground was filled with cracks. "Your Majesty, this white jade is to be used to build a palace." Rinpoche was a little distressed, mainly because he had spoken the truth just now. The Empress still hadn't vented her anger, so she stepped on Tong Jingye's head again and said coldly, "If you continue to speak without thinking, I will hang you on the top of the city wall so that the commoners can pay their respects to the Minister of Works." She then turned to look at Rinpoche and realized that his gaze was constantly moving up and down her chest. Her pretty face quickly flushed, but her eyes were flickering with a dangerous glint. Rinpoche was already considering taking the initiative to press his head to the ground so that it wouldn't hurt too much. "There's a door here." The voice came just in time. He felt that they should be given a Dayo Peace Prize. The Empress gave Rinpoche a look that said, "Just you wait, I'll teach you a lesson later." Then she walked forward. A crashing sound came from behind. Tong Jingye pulled his head out and patted the dust off it. He then looked at Rinpoche with hidden bitterness. Rinpoche responded with a smile that said, "We are different." After walking along the passageway for more than 40 meters, everyone finally saw the so-called door. Its entire body was black and it was made of some unknown metal. Under the light of the torch, it reflected a cold luster. On the iron gate was a winged snake with its tail hanging down to the ground. Its head was near the top of the iron gate, and a pair of wings were folded behind its back. Different from the color of the iron door, it appeared to be gray in color. Rinpoche subconsciously felt that it looked familiar and immediately asked, "What kind of beast is this?" Tong Jingye shook his head to indicate that he did not know. The Empress had no reaction at all. It seemed that both of them didn't know, but when Rinpoche saw this picture he thought of the Chinese legend of the flying serpent. Rinpoche always felt that this world was somewhat related to Earth. Although the language was different, Chinese was also spoken in this world. Furthermore, there were dragons, phoenixes, kirins, and even a kirin in the palace. However, Qi Shui wasn't as powerful as the mythical beast in the legends. It couldn't fly or burrow into the ground. At most, it was at the cardinal heaven level, which was a far cry from the legends. However, there was no doubt that Qi Shui was similar to the kirin in the legends on Earth. They even had the same name. With these similarities, the appearance of another soaring serpent from Wuxia mythology in this world was not too surprising. However, Rinpoche didn't voice out his conjecture. The Empress stretched out her palm to push open the iron gate, but her face changed the moment she touched the flying serpent. She retreated a few meters and stood right in front of Rinpoche. "It's true." The Empress's words shocked everyone. Everyone thought that the beast on the gate was a carving and didn't expect it to be a real beast. However, when the Empress touched the beast on the gate, cracks began to appear on its surface. Following which, pieces of the beast fell to the ground. Only then did everyone realize that the beast had already become an empty shell. In the blink of an eye, the beast turned into pieces on the ground. However, the Empress's eyes flashed. She went forward and picked up a gray bead that was about the size of a pigeon egg. She casually rubbed it, and the bead began to emit a green luster, but it was very dim. "What is this?" Everyone was puzzled. Whether it was this beast or this bead, they had never seen anything like it before. Rinpoche reached out and rubbed the bead on the Empress's palm. The surface of the bead was still a little elastic. Rinpoche immediately imagined that this beast had condensed all of its strength into a bead before its death for its descendants. This was a common plot in Wuxia novels. However, he still had to study this bead carefully to know what it was. The Empress fiddled with it and couldn't figure out what it was used for. She then threw it to Rinpoche, who quickly caught it and put it away. Everyone else thought that this was a beast that they had never seen before, but Rinpoche treated it as a mythical beast from the legends. Whatever it left behind would definitely not be ordinary. "Is this beast the guard of this gate?" Rinpoche guessed. "It's possible." The female Empress nodded her head. This passageway was not damaged at all before they came in. This beast was either hung on the metal door or it had been here all along and died later on. Everyone was more inclined to the latter possibility. This beast didn't leave this place until it died. "I wonder who the owner of this place is," the Empress said softly. She stepped forward and was about to push the gate open. If everyone guessed correctly, the guard here was that weathered beast, so there shouldn't be any mechanisms on the gate. However, just in case, Tang Xingye stepped forward to stop the Empress. "Your Majesty, let me do it." Tang Xingye placed his hand on the gate and increased his strength bit by bit. When he used 80% of his strength, his face began to turn red, and a dull creaking sound came from the gate. "Open!" Tang Xingye shouted. He used all his strength and began to push the gate open bit by bit. Everyone was on guard until Tang Xingye pushed the main gate open, but there were no mechanisms or anything like that. However, there was a gust of wind, and the torch in the guard's hand flickered before suddenly extinguishing. Everyone felt a little stuffy in their chests. Chapter 851. Who lights the candle and blows out the lamp? It sounds pretty powerful. The Empress was still a little confused after being pulled outside. It's just a legend. In fact, there's a lack of oxygen inside. Renbachien sat cross-legged on the ground and laughed. Oxygen? I think I've heard of it before. The Empress pondered and waved her hand. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan carried 2 chairs over. There are actually different components in the air, such as nitrogen, hydrogen, ozone, oxygen, carbon monoxide, and carbon dioxide. There are also various inert gases. Among them, oxygen is what living things need to survive. Without oxygen, they will suffocate to death. Renbachien rested his elbows on the chair and was too lazy to get up. In fact, it was cooler under the shade of the trees. In addition, some of the gases in this world were different from those on Earth. This was a conclusion that the research institute had obtained from some microorganisms. However, Renbachien didn't bring back a bottle of air, so he naturally didn't verify it. The Empress sat on a chair and waved her hand while listening to Renbachien's explanation. "Bring me some wine. It's unknown how long it's been sealed down there. Some invisible microorganisms will consume oxygen, and after a long time, there will be a lack of oxygen. If an ordinary person goes in, they will die in a few minutes. There may also be some other gases sealed inside which are harmful and not beneficial. Therefore, ventilation is needed before going in," Renbachien explained to the Empress. Tang Xingye and the officials from the Ministry of Works found it interesting and couldn't help but ask, "Why did the torch go out?" They knew about this phenomenon but didn't know why. It's because of oxygen. Not only do living things need oxygen, but flames also need oxygen. If there's a lack of oxygen, the flame will go out. Renbachien's explanation made them even more interested. This so-called oxygen can really play a lot of roles. Under normal circumstances, it will take at least half a day for ventilation to go in, one of the officials from the Ministry of Works said. It's easy to speed it up. Find someone in the passage and strike at the door with all their might to drive the air flow and accelerate the air exchange. This will shorten the time. Xanja. The Empress called out softly. "I'll arrange it, Your Majesty." Xanja had never been slow to respond to official matters and immediately understood. Soon, the sound of an empty palm striking the air could be heard from the pit. It sounded like a huge object was being waved, but it was somewhat different. This was much more useful than using a fan. "So Tang, what era do you think this is from?" Renbachien asked. Tang Xingye shook his head. "I don't know much about this." Renbachien had a vague idea that this passage was probably left behind when the human race was chased out of this place, or perhaps not long after that. The soaring serpent. Even if it couldn't compare to a qilin or a dragon, it wasn't too far off. That was the most likely time to appear. If that was the case, someone definitely wanted to leave something here. In that case, Renbachien had some guesses about the things on the wall. "Your Majesty, what do you think that portrait is about?" Renbachien placed his palm on the Empress's knee. She casually placed a fruit in his hand. Their movements were as smooth as flowing water, and there wasn't the slightest bit of hesitation in their hands. This made Tang Xingye's eyebrows twitch. He inexplicably thought of that woman from back then. "Do you have an idea?" the Empress asked casually. "Does Your Majesty have a guess as well?" Renbachien finished the fruit in a few bites. "I think it might be a road map," Renbachien said bluntly. "This is the map of the 60,000 mountains. The first place we saw when we went down was the forest pillar screen. When we got close to the door, we would be in the depths of the 60,000 mountains," the Empress said. "Your Majesty can actually recognize the other party's drawing skills." Renbachien was very impressed. Being able to recognize a map of this level was already a kind of ability. However, the Empress's words confirmed his thoughts. "How can there be a road map of the 60,000 mountains here?" Tang Xingye was slightly stunned. "Have you forgotten what I said? It's just a guess and we can only know the specifics by observing it." The Empress said to Hong Wan, "Go to Qingxin Palace Hall. There is a map of the vicinity of the forest pillar screen left behind by the Hao nation there. Go and get it." She then snorted and said, "This map was drawn when the Hao nation attacked the mountain stronghold." After Hong Wan left, Tong Jinye's face was gloomy. He recalled the things that His Majesty had said. The human race had been driven here from a distant place, and there were less than 100,000 of them. A portion of them were left behind to defend the 60,000 mountains, while the rest came to the plains to establish a nation. There were many other races in the 60,000 mountains. On the other side of the 60,000 mountains, there were the so-called tens of thousands of races. When the Empress first said this, everyone in the imperial court was shocked. However, this matter was too unimaginable and there was no other news, so everyone gradually put this matter to the back of their minds. The passage below wasn't simple. Just the white jade floor alone wasn't something that ordinary people could achieve. If the road map of the 60,000 mountains was really left on the wall, combined with what the Empress had said, it was very likely that it was left behind from that period. When the map was brought over, Ren Baqin glanced at it. It was much more presentable than the things on the wall below. At least he could tell that it was a map. After looking at it for a long time, Ren Baqin couldn't figure anything out and could only give up. After another hour, everyone felt that it was about time and went down to the passage again. They weren't in a hurry to go inside, but stopped at the beginning of the mural on the wall. After comparing it with the map, it was very easy to see the problem. This is the forest pillar screen. It's about the same position as on the map. That's right, it's indeed there. Ren Baqin pointed to the holes on the wall. Each hole was a mountain peak. This is Mount Yufan, this is the Black Ridge, and this is Mount Pingliang. Tong Jinye compared them one by one. Your Majesty, this is the end of the map. The map only shows the range of the forest pillar screen for half a month, Tong Jinye said as he gestured. However, on the wall it was less than 1 meter. The mural on the wall was more than 40 meters long. If this was true, it would take at least 2 years to complete the route drawn on the wall. This is Qiulong Cliff. They passed through here in the past. The Empress calculated as she walked and then pointed to one of the points. There was a strange symbol in that position. After hearing what the Empress said and looking at the symbol carefully, one could barely guess that it was a symbol of a dragon's head. The drawing of this symbol was too demonic. Ren Baqin believed that it was a pile of feces with 2 wooden sticks stuck in it. It would take at least 1.5 months to travel from Yi City through the forest pillar screen to Qiulong Cliff, and that was with the speed of a mount. On the wall, there was only a distance of 1.5 meters. Looking at the wall behind them that was dozens of meters long, everyone took a deep breath. Now, everyone finally had a little idea of how big the 60,000 mountains was. According to the length of the map, it would take at least 2 years to get out of here. There was a zigzagging line on the wall from the beginning to the end, which was the route that those people had taken. Chapter 852. The sound of footsteps resounded in the passage, and no one paid attention to the route map on the wall. Everyone was looking forward to finding out what was in that secret chamber. When they first discovered that there was a building under the palace, they thought that it was a hidden treasure of the Hao nation. However, the evidence at this moment indicated that this passage and the secret chamber should have been left behind by the humans after they evacuated here a long time ago. Compared to the things left behind from this period, wealth was nothing. Even if the aboriginals were poor, even if Dayo had no money, even if they had a lot. Anyway, even if they had no money, they could still rob others. In any case, the Empress's 3 views had never been correct. To her and even the imperial court, robbing other nations was as right as eating and drinking. The guard held a torch and entered the secret chamber first. The light from the torch immediately illuminated the secret chamber. However, the secret chamber was unexpectedly large, and the light from the torch couldn't illuminate the entire place. After passing through the door of the secret chamber, the space expanded to the sides. The entire secret chamber was 20 meters wide, and the floor was completely paved with white jade. After walking a few meters forward, a white jade bridge appeared in front of them. On both sides of the bridge was a pool that was full of yellow-brown liquid that emitted a gloomy aura. Everyone stopped in their tracks. In a trance, they seemed to see a world that they had never seen before. Countless humans in armor and weapons were fighting a bloody battle with all kinds of foreign races. Some had human heads and beast bodies, some had beast heads and human bodies, some were expressionless herdsmen, and there were jade-waisted slaves that filled the sky. There were also people from the 8-armed race that had 4 or even 6 arms. There were also people from races that were 4 to 5 meters tall that were like giants. There were even countless fellows that couldn't be distinguished between foreign races and beasts. All the races were killing each other in this area. However, apart from the humans, all the other races were enemies. Streaks of sword light flashed and heads flew into the air. The bare-handed warriors tore their opponents into two halves. Groups of humans were bleeding in this kind of killing, and their faces were filled with indignation and unwillingness as they fell to the ground with a thud. Shouts, killing cries, the sound of blood splattering, the sound of corpses falling to the ground, the sound of weapons colliding, and even the sound of something breaking through the air rushed into everyone's ears at almost the same time. This kind of tragic scene made everyone tremble all over. It was as if there was a ball of fire pressing on their chests, making them want to scream out loud. A figure rose from the ground, and a red sun leaped out from behind him, stopping about 3 feet above the man's head. Although they were too far away to see clearly, the pressure emanating from that figure caused everyone to involuntarily take a few steps back. Looks of fear appeared on the faces of countless outsiders. Then, the man swung his arms downwards and the red sun smashed down. Boom. His eyes seemed to be covered with flames. The guards' bodies swayed as they woke up from the hallucination, their bodies drenched in sweat. Following them were the officials from the Ministry of Works and Rinpoche. The moment he woke up, he realized that he was clenching his fists tightly, and his back was drenched in cold sweat. Everyone looked at each other, and a look of surprise appeared on their faces. What did I just see? Who was that figure? Was that really a human? At that moment, Tong Jinya suddenly shouted angrily. He took a step forward and threw a punch. The wind from his punch whistled and he didn't hold back at all. It was as if he wanted to smash the enemy in front of him into pieces. However, just as he threw the punch, Tong Jinya suddenly woke up, slightly withdrew his punch and staggered. Only half of the punch was withdrawn, and the other half was still thrown forward. The air suddenly exploded with a loud sound, and a gale swept in all directions. This retracted punch caused the air to explode. Rinpoche glanced at Tong Jinya. Although this old man was an old hooligan who loved to court death, his strength was really amazing. He might not be weaker than Li Qianqiu and Shiwanya. However, when he thought about the scene that he just saw, there were actually many people who weren't weaker than Tong Jinya. As for the figure that smashed down the red sun, it was even more frightening. Even looking at that figure from afar was enough to make people tremble. Tong Jinya stabilized his body after throwing the punch, and his face was full of shock. At this moment, the Empress's head was also drenched in cold sweat. After a few breaths, the Empress's figure suddenly leaped backward and actually landed behind everyone. At this time, the Empress gradually regained consciousness, looked around, and her expression changed again and again. An official from the Ministry of Works couldn't help but ask with a pale face and a fearful voice, "What happened at this time?" Such a tragic battlefield was really terrifying. What everyone saw, was it something that had happened before? "This is the Wan tribe?" Tong Jinya asked in a deep voice. Rinpoche opened his mouth and said in a hoarse voice, "This is the Wan tribe. All of you retreat." The minister of the Ministry of Works, "Stay behind," the Empress said to everyone after regaining her composure. After hearing the order, everyone didn't dare to stay any longer and retreated out of the door. At this time, the Empress said in a deep voice, "That was the battlefield that happened before, and it was recorded by someone using some kind of method. It's the water from the Earthine spring." Rinpoche pointed to the yellowish-brown liquid in the pond around the bridge and said, "I can smell it with my eyes closed. This is the water from the Earthine spring." Tong Jinya and the Empress didn't realize the difference between smelling with their eyes open and closed. "The Earthine spring does have a hallucinogenic effect." The Empress nodded. "It seems that they used some kind of method to record it and then used the hallucinogenic effect of the Earthine spring to let us see that scene. It seems that the more powerful one is, the slower they wake up and the more they see." Rinpoche asked a question that he wanted to know the answer to. What happened to that person? Was he the master of this place? He died. The Empress was moved when she recalled the scene she saw. He was surrounded and killed by several experts from the foreign races. This was expected. Less than 100,000 humans were chased here, so it was expected that such experts would die. However, Rinpoche still felt that it was a pity. He also felt that it was scary. How could the foreign races be so powerful on the other side of the mountain? The power of that red sun just now was probably comparable to a miniature nuclear warhead. Although he couldn't see the whole picture, Rinpoche felt that the power of that blow was probably comparable to the 2 miniature nuclear warheads that he had used before. How could a human be so powerful? Seeing such a scene as soon as they came in made everyone feel even more anxious. This jade bridge was about 10 meters long. After crossing it, there was a square platform that was also surrounded by the earthine spring. The platform was about 30 to 40 square meters, and a thin figure was sitting on it. They couldn't see his face clearly, but after seeing the illusion just now, Rinpoche and the others couldn't help but feel respect for him. No matter what, this person was a martyr of the human race. Unfortunately, after so many years, this person's corpse was probably like that of the flying serpent. A jade scroll was spread open before the figure that was sitting cross-legged. The figure's withered finger was pointing at the end of the jade scroll. Chapter 853. The moment Rinpoche saw those two words, a sense of sorrow pervaded his heart. The skeleton in front of him was covered in gray clothes made of an unknown material. Its hair was messy, and its skin was dry and clung tightly to the bones, barely maintaining a human sitting posture. Although he didn't know its identity, judging from the white jade road and the flying serpent guarding the door, this skeleton probably had a high status. During the War of the 10,000 Races, the human race was defeated, and the remaining 100,000 were driven to the barren land. The owner of this skeleton was one of them. After passing through the 60,000 mountains, he perished here, and the last word he left before he died was, "Go home." Rinpoche's mind instantly came up with a plot of more than 3 million words, which was enough to write a long novel. The owner of this skeleton was either a ruler or a reclusive expert who was seriously injured after the war with the 10,000 races. He dragged his broken body and led the human race through the 60,000 mountains. When he finally couldn't hold on any longer, he left behind a tomb and an endless desire to go home. This kind of sad plot might be made into a movie that would be very popular. Rinpoche subconsciously labeled this place as a tomb. With such a building and two skeletons left so deep underground, it looked like a tomb no matter how he looked at it. "Senior, sorry to disturb you." Rinpoche cupped his hands toward the skeleton. "If there is a chance, we will definitely return to that land and send you home." Rinpoche's face was full of rare respect. The Empress and Tongjinya were the same. They cupped their hands in front of them to express their respect. Rinpoche then stepped forward and carefully pulled out the jade scroll from under the skeleton. Although he was careful enough, the finger was still touched and fell off little by little. Just like the flying serpent, it turned into ashes and scattered on the ground. Until now, no one knew how long it had been since the human race had evacuated here. However, Rinpoche felt that he should be able to find out something from this tomb. Rinpoche then picked up the jade booklet, swept away the dust and continued to look at it. The scroll was written from right to left, but Rinpoche was used to reading from left to right. Therefore he directly saw the second last sentence. "I didn't put away my clothes. I just remembered." This change in style was too fast and Rinpoche suddenly felt like vomiting blood. All the sorrow that was originally in his heart vanished. The last two sentences were linked together. "I just remembered that I didn't put away my clothes, so I went home." Rinpoche felt like he had Keta husky. This unknown expert comrade was too down to earth. Also, what time was it? Still thinking about collecting the clothes at home? Rinpoche rubbed his head and read it from beginning to end. "I lament that the human race has withered to such an extent, being driven like livestock for tens of thousands of miles, stained with blood and tears. My kin have all been buried somewhere else. Although I don't have long to live, my heart is sad, and I only hope that the future generations can return to their homeland. I sit and think of the past vividly in my mind. Only now do I remember that I haven't packed my clothes and returned home." There weren't many words on the jade slip, only about 300 or so. The general meaning was similar to what Rinpoche had thought. The humans were driven here. This person was seriously injured and didn't have long to live. As such, he left a grave here in hopes that the people who came after him could return to their homeland one day. In the end he sat here and waited for death. The past was still vivid in his mind, and he suddenly remembered that he hadn't collected any clothes at home. Go home. He guessed that there were a few more words after that. Going home is unattainable. This was the full text. It didn't say much useful. It only mentioned the blood and tears of the human race along the way and didn't mention a single word about the so-called one tribe. The 300 words were mostly sentimental words. However, after reading it, the sense of absurdity in Rinpoche's heart disappeared without a trace, and his heart was full of regret. Before this person died, he wasn't thinking about the future of the human race or the righteousness of the race. Instead, he was thinking about the trivial matters at home. On the contrary, Rinpoche felt that this person was living a more realistic life. The three of them were speechless for a long time after reading it. Rinpoche looked around this person and found that there seemed to be something behind him. He went around and found that there were actually a few animal skin booklets and a jade scroll. "Your Majesty, there are still things here." Rinpoche picked up the booklets and the jade scroll from the ground. There were a total of 4 animal skin booklets. After so many years they hadn't turned into ashes. Although they were a little brittle, they could still be saved. The Empress took the jade scroll and opened it. There weren't any records about the Wan tribe or that land that everyone wanted to know. Instead, there were some self-descriptions of this person. This person on the ground was called Tingjinji, and he was a member of a sect called the Qingyang sect. The jade scroll recorded some of this person's deeds, and it was like a personal biography. From these words, it was possible to get a glimpse of the situation of that era. For example, this person recorded that there were 5 human emperors in the world at the same time. He had seen 3 of them and fought under 2 of them. For example, at that time the human race occupied 10 territories and he had traveled to 7 territories. For example, this person recorded that there were 3,000 sects at that time. Generally speaking, this jade scroll was a personal biography, and it was the traces that this person had left in this world. Although it wasn't explicitly stated, it could be seen from the words that this person wasn't a nobody. At the end of the jade scroll, it was written, "In the past there were 3,000 sects, but today not a single one of them remains. Leaving behind the Qingyang technique, even if I die, the Qingyang of my sect will not disappear." It seemed that the 4 animal skin booklets were the so-called Qingyang technique. The sect that this person belonged to was probably called the Qingyang sect or the Qingyang sect or something like that. After putting away the 2 jade scrolls and the 4 booklets, the 3 of them looked around on the platform and found nothing valuable. The only thing that existed was that skeleton. Perhaps there was something else on his body, but the 3 of them didn't want to destroy it. After being sealed for so long, it was already rare that it hadn't been eroded after opening the door for ventilation. If they were to touch it, they would probably immediately turn into ashes. Just as they were about to go out, Rinpoche looked up and suddenly stopped in his tracks as he let out a surprised sound. "What's wrong?" The Empress turned to look at him, followed his gaze, and saw that there were some engravings on the ceiling that was illuminated by the fire. "This seems to be a map?" Rinpoche looked at it carefully. "Your Majesty, could this be a map of that area?" If the map outside was a map of the 60,000 mountains, then it was highly likely that this was a map of the area where humans once lived. "Get someone to copy it later," the Empress said softly. After looking at the 2 jade scrolls, the Empress felt a little heavy and wanted to leave this place. After everyone left, Tong Jinye asked, "Your Majesty, do you want to let the other officials know about this?" Xinje informed the 2 elders, the 6 ministers, and the general-in-chief who supports the nation to come over. The Empress then said, "They must know." They had to see the illusion in the secret room and these 2 jade scrolls so that they would know what had happened in the past and what would happen in the future. In particular, they had to know about the tragic war in the illusion. Chapter 854. The 2 elders, the 6 ministers, and the general-in-chief who supports the nation, Hongwu, and everyone else were still wondering what had happened when they arrived. After all, the Empress rarely summoned everyone at this time. They were even more puzzled when they found out that it was about the building beneath the Emperor's bedroom. After all, they knew that the Empress's bedroom had collapsed. They knew that it had collapsed on the night of their wedding night. They knew that something had been found beneath the Emperor's bedroom. After all, the Empress didn't order anyone to keep this a secret. She wanted everyone to know that the Emperor's bedroom had collapsed because of the building beneath it and that it had nothing to do with her. What exactly was beneath the Emperor's bedroom? What could make the Empress mobilize so many people? However, when they came out of the tombs, all of them seemed to be in a daze. The impact of the illusion was too great. Now they no longer had any doubts about what the Empress had said. They were even more worried about the potential enemies of the human race. No one said things like, "Since the human race has been developing here for so many years, we won't attract the retaliation of those unknown races if we continue to stay here." The Aboriginals had always been a very headstrong race. Knowing where the enemy was and killing them all was the style of the Aboriginals. Furthermore, anyone who could reach the cardinal heaven level was an outstanding talent. Seeing such a vast world, everyone was even more shocked. Then they felt a sense of heroism. There was no one who did not yearn for such a magnificent world. The only thing that made everyone doubt was that the enemy this time was too strong. In that illusion, the Kismet Heaven experts were only the most ordinary soldiers, and the Cardinal Heaven experts were only equivalent to the elite winged cavalry warriors. On that tragic battlefield there were many Cardinal Heaven experts. Also, no one knew if that expert who could create a huge fireball was at the top of the longevity heaven or higher. In short, after thousands of years, the human race had not become stronger because of their reproduction. Instead they had become weaker. "Sirs, Her Majesty invites everyone to Zichan Palace Hall for dinner," Xenja said as she waited for everyone to arrive. "Please lead the way, Commander." Zichan Palace Hall didn't have a table for 1 or 2 people like in formal banquets. Instead there was a big pot on the table. The water inside was constantly boiling, and some ingredients were floating up and down. The cauldron was surrounded by plates filled with meat, fresh vegetables and fruits. There was also a famous dish from Earth, pickled cabbage. "Sit down and have your dinner first," the Empress said with a plate in one hand and a pair of chopsticks in the other. Everyone looked at each other. Even though Rinpochen and the Empress often ate hot pot, the Empress basically didn't allow anyone to dine in the palace. Occasionally the banquets she gave were formal ones. Naturally, everyone had never eaten hot pot before. "Take a seat. It's more convenient to talk this way," the Water Empress said. Rinpochen ignored them and poured 2 plates of meat into the pot. He was prepared to strike first and gain the upper hand. The main reason was that it was too stressful to eat with a group of Cardinal Heaven experts. If he didn't make the first move, he would probably only be able to lick the plates. Everyone sat down and imitated the actions of the Empress and Rinpochen. They scooped out the food from the pot to eat. At first they were rather shy. After a short while, even the doddering Shurqing's hand speed was like that of a great sorcerer who had been single for 60 years. Shurqing picked up a piece of pork rib with his chopsticks and smiled at everyone like a blooming chrysanthemum. His face seemed to be saying, "I'm old. Give in to me. Don't fight with me." Everyone smiled at him and said, "Please enjoy, Great Elder." Shurqing nodded in satisfaction. Just as he picked up the pork rib, someone beside him snatched it away with a pair of chopsticks. "Thank you, Great Elder," Rinpochen said gratefully. Fortunately, Shurqing was at the table. Even though he was the Great Elder, he wasn't very strong and was about the same level as Rinpochen. Rinpochen could only snatch some food from him. Other than that, Rinpochen didn't even have the chance to pick up his chopsticks. Everyone pounded their stomachs before the Empress said, "What do you think after reading it?" "I have heard from all the officials below. This is what Her Majesty said, right? The human race was driven over. There is another world on the other side of the 60,000 mountains, and there are tens of thousands of races living there." Hongwu put down his chopsticks and smiled. "I originally thought that after conquering the Yun nation, Great Xia could barely take care of itself, and that I could live in peace for some time. Now that I have a new goal, I feel my blood boiling again. I would like to request to be transferred to the 60,000 mountains to guard the border for Her Majesty and open up a path. I want to see if those foreign races are really that powerful. There's no need to doubt them. The few that we met in the 60,000 mountains were all equivalent to Cardinal Heaven experts," Rinpochen said as he ate. "And from the illusions, it seems that the outsiders are stronger than us. There's no doubt about that. I learned from the herdsmen that this is a barren land. Since they banished us humans to this place, there must be a reason behind it. After so many years, Spirit Wheel and Cardinal Heaven experts have become experts, and it is almost impossible to see anyone above this level, which proves this point. What's the reason? I find it strange as well. In the illusion, the human race wasn't considered weak, and there were many Cardinal Heaven and Spirit Wheel experts. 2-1 raised her head and asked. They lack something. It could be spiritual energy, the vitality of heaven and earth, or something else. There must be something missing here. Therefore, after so many years, the number of humans has increased from 100,000 to hundreds of millions, but their strength hasn't improved. Instead, it has regressed, Rinpochen said resolutely. In addition, don't think that they can forget about us. There are still people in the 60,000 mountains who are monitoring us. Those herdsmen are responsible for this responsibility. Many people put down their chopsticks after hearing what he said. After so many years, the human race has become weaker while they are recuperating. The enemy is strong and we are weak. How can we go back? These Aboriginal bigwigs finally felt like they were being beaten. In the past, it was always the Aboriginals who beat the other countries and crushed them with their strength. Now they were being crushed by others and they were at their wits' end. In terms of numbers, there were countless races in that world. In terms of strength, they couldn't be compared. As time passed, the gap was gradually widening. Will they also attack each other? Qin Chuan suddenly asked. It's possible, but we can't expect them to become weaker than us after so many years. It's like a war between two countries. We can't expect the other country to suddenly erupt in civil strife and then kill itself, right? It's not impossible. Jin Chuan laughed. Isn't Great Xia playing itself to death? If we don't return to that world, we won't be able to recover to our former glory. However, when we return, the other races will still be eyeing us covetously, and we won't even be able to stand firm. This situation is indeed difficult to deal with. Zhao Prince Consort, I'm afraid we will have to rely on those strange tools of yours. Shi Qing smiled at Ren Baqian. Ren Baqian nodded and said, technology does need to be developed. Weapons? Actually, I didn't want to develop weapons at first. After all, the disadvantage of having fewer aboriginals will be magnified in the face of guns and cannons. However, under such circumstances, weapons must be developed. Ren Baqian felt that no matter how powerful the other party was, as long as they gathered their troops, 10 little fatties would be enough to make them piss blood. If 10 wasn't enough, then 10 more would be enough. There was nothing that a nuclear bomb couldn't destroy. If there was, then the yield wasn't large enough and the quantity wasn't large enough. However, there are two problems. First, the development of technology requires the advancement of the entire society's technology to a certain level, and the people's understanding of technology must reach a certain level. This is the foundation. We can't build spaceships while the entire country is still in a primitive society. All aspects of technology are interrelated and promote each other. We must start immediately to raise the cultural level of the people. Education for all is imperative. Ren Baqian and the Empress looked at each other. They didn't expect this matter to be raised so quickly. The other thing is the experts. Weapons may not be able to eliminate the experts of the other party. In fact, we may not even have the chance to use our weapons when the experts of the other party launch a surprise attack. We must have experts of the same level to restrain the other party. I'm afraid this is even more difficult than creating Big Ivan. After all, with the popularization of technology and culture, technology will always improve. Even if it takes a few decades or 100 years, we will eventually achieve our goal. As for experts, experts who can contend with the experts of the other party can't be accumulated over time, especially when we are in a land of exile. We may never be able to produce experts who can contend with the other party. Chapter 855. They didn't discuss much during the hot pot meal. Ren Baqian proposed universal education, but other than the Empress, no one else understood the importance of universal education. Their thinking was still at the stage of one-man workshops. Ren Baqian and the students from the academy could handle high-end things, and they could even recruit more disciples. Not only did they understand, but many people also wouldn't let their children learn things that weren't of much use. For the common people, steam engines, internal combustion engines, gunpowder propulsion, and nuclear fission were too far away. They were so far away that they didn't even want to know what they were. Practicing martial arts was the right way. Not to mention that martial arts experts could enter the imperial court, they could also go hunting, which would at least ensure their own survival. It wasn't a problem for individuals to think this way. However, at the national level, if everyone thought this way, then there would be a big problem. According to the normal development of society, this period couldn't be estimated. It was unknown how many years had passed in this world for the productivity of society to reach this level. At most, it was at the level of the Song dynasty, and it wasn't even as prosperous. Ren Baqian even wanted to use educational incentives to reward people with money or food for every completed year of courses. This way, the people who could only see what was in front of them would have a little interest in learning. It wasn't derogatory to only see what was in front of them, but rather the limitations of this era. Under the circumstances where ordinary people couldn't even guarantee their survival, only what was in front of them was the most important. Ren Baqian wanted to use incentives to increase people's interest in learning, but the biggest problem was that he didn't have enough money. Although they had conquered the entire Yin nation, they didn't plunder wantonly in order to rule the region. Although they had plundered a lot of money, it only filled the national treasury, which had always been tearfully invested. Compared to Dayo's previous national treasury income, there were too many things to do. The financial and material resources consumed by road construction alone weren't small, which couldn't support Ren Baqian's ideas at all. Therefore, the primary goal was to make money. The prerequisite for making money was to have a stable Yun nation. In the end, it came back to the point that the Yun nation had to be completely stabilized before vigorously developing the economy, education, and productivity to achieve a stage of overall prosperity before the next step could be carried out. This time it was different from the past. This time, the 6 ministers and the 2 elders understood the significance and future direction of the Yun nation, so there wouldn't be any obstacles in the implementation of various matters. Finally, there's the matter I mentioned before, experts. In a situation where technology hasn't reached the stage where it can crush an individual in all aspects, top-notch experts are indispensable. Their role is undoubtedly huge. Ren Baqin brought up the past again. Qin Chuan was the first to pat his chest and say, "It's enough that we have the sons of the aboriginals. Once we've broken through the 60,000 mountains, we'll think of a way to find a deserted place and send experts there to train. Since our ancestors could do it, we can definitely do it too." The others also nodded their heads, obviously agreeing with this statement. I can't deny that the ancient race is very powerful. But could the aboriginals defeat all the other races by themselves? With a population of more than 10 million, and in a situation where they were far behind, they were able to produce a high-end force that was enough to fight against the myriad races? If the myriad races were so easy to deal with, the human race wouldn't have been forced to come here in the first place. Do you have the confidence that you can reach the level of the person who can make a big fireball in the illusion? Except for Her Majesty. Ren Baqin said as he patted the back of the Empress's hand. Your Majesty's talent is unquestionable. Even in this land of exile, Your Majesty can break through at any time. Given Your Majesty's age, it wouldn't be inappropriate to say that Your Majesty is the most talented person in thousands of years. However, is it enough for you to fight alone? To face the myriad races that have lived for an unknown period of time and have a complete inheritance? Or do you want to see Her Majesty risk her life by herself? Zhao Prince Consort, tell me what you think. Shi Qing smiled as he had already guessed what Ren Baqin was going to say. Although the ordinary humans aren't very strong, there will still be outstanding people among them. Furthermore, their base number is higher, and the number of people with high awareness is also not small. I remember that only Her Majesty and the Great General are among the top 10 experts, right? That's because there are many aboriginal experts in the mountains and no one knows about them, Qin Chuan immediately retorted. Of course, this is one of the reasons, but how many of those experts are there? Although the 60,000 mountains are dangerous, it's also a treasure trove. Are there more aboriginal experts in the mountains than in the world? As long as the aboriginals enter the cardinal heaven level, they won't be weaker than ordinary spirit wheel experts and can even fight 1 against 2. Qin Chuan seemed to feel that Ren Baqin was underestimating the aboriginals and was rather angry. What about Li Yuanzhu? Apart from Her Majesty, who else can compete with her? What about the ball-kicking monster? There's also the second most powerful expert in the world who has been missing for a long time. You want to subdue those experts? The Empress frowned slightly. She didn't know about the others, but she had seen Li Yuanzhu before and had a deep impression of her. It's not impossible. In addition to those well-known experts, there are also those young experts who have emerged. They aren't weak, and if given the opportunity, they may be able to grow to a very high level. There are even some who are talented but have been overlooked. Even if they can't become experts, they can still become warriors, Ren Baqin said faintly. Don't forget that if we fail to return to that land, we may not have the chance to start again. Back then, they were forced to suffer heavy losses, and the human race still had experts in charge, so they banished us here. Now, they have long since recuperated, and the strength of the human race is getting weaker. If we go back, they may not just banish us back here. Therefore, this concerns all the aboriginals and the entire human race. As long as we set foot on that path, there is no room for retreat. Therefore, we need every bit of strength we have. The aboriginals are part of the human race. I am, and so are they. Even though Ren Baqin's speech couldn't be considered impassioned, it was resolute and decisive, and everyone began to ponder over it. Are you going to leak the information about the Wan tribe? The Empress asked. Ren Baqin shook his head and replied, not for the time being and not now. However, we can leak it to a few people such as the ball-kicking monster and Li Yuanzhu. Putting aside the ball-kicking monster, Li Fu had completely become a ball-kicking monster. The others might also have doubts. After all, there were some martial arts techniques passed down from ancient times, but there were almost no other records of them. If we can get the support of these top experts, the chances of subduing other experts will be much higher. Besides, we can also use some other methods, such as holding a martial arts competition to select young experts and seedlings from all of Dayo, including the Jing tribe and the Yin nation. We need to carry out 2 things at the same time. On the one hand, we need to increase productivity and let more people leave the most basic production activities to become the cornerstone of the technological explosion. This is culture. On the other hand, we need to select those talented experts and seedlings to cultivate high-end combat power. This is culture. What other ideas do you have? The Empress looked at the others. I'm afraid that some of them have ulterior motives, Shirqing said. There were so many experts and many of them had strange methods, both good and evil. Not to mention whether or not they could be subdued, he was afraid that some of them might have ulterior motives, which would cause considerable trouble. It might even cause considerable damage. Among those experts, some of them are relatively neutral and will naturally be the primary target. We can contact those who are uncertain about their good or evil behavior. As for those who are too evil, we can kill them directly. What about Great Xia and the Qin nation? Hongwu suddenly asked. In fact, these two countries were very important. Not only did they have vast land, various minerals, but they also had a large population base. However, it was obviously unwise to have any ideas about these two countries before they absorbed the Yun nation. Besides, there were other ways to obtain the minerals and population of these two countries besides occupying them. For example, economic plunder and talent absorption. Chapter 856. After the crowd dispersed, Rinpoche held the Empress's hand and walked around the palace. Dayo at night was much more comfortable than during the day. After the sun fell to the horizon, the temperature began to drop, and a cool breeze blew, making people feel relaxed and happy. You have a lot of things to do. The Empress's voice was faint and a little emotional. Capable people do more work. Rinpoche chuckled. But I don't seem to have anything to do. Those who work hard govern others, and those who work hard govern others. Rinpoche immediately changed his tune. Are you a laborer? The Empress asked with a smile on her face. Definitely. You just said that capable people do more work. I'm a capable person among the workers. Rinpoche laughed. This wasn't a problem at all. However, Rinpoche did have a lot of things to do now. The academy couldn't be delayed, and he had to choose the breakthrough point in science and technology. After all, according to Dayo's current level, it would take at least a few decades of accumulation to fully promote scientific and technological progress. Therefore, it could only be promoted by human intervention. In addition, he had to pay attention to the situation in the Yun nation, find ways to make money to fill the national treasury, prepare for the World Martial Arts competition, and plan for the new city. In the future, he would have to pay attention to the experts in the world. In fact, if the tasks were spread out, it wouldn't be a lot. However, there was no one who could be of great use. The big shots in the imperial court ran faster than the other when they were asked to chop people with axes. They hadn't lost in fighting and they hadn't lost in chopping either. If they were asked to do these messy things, they had to be prepared to be screwed up by them. Rinpoche had to take care of things first and then slowly spread them out. The two of them chatted for a while and stopped talking as they enjoyed the company around them. After a long time, the Empress sighed slightly and said, "You have worked hard." How could she not know about the current situation? However, there was really no one available for these things. Rinpoche squeezed her palm. It's nothing. I'm also very curious about that land. Besides, my lifespan can be extended after breaking through. With my talent, I was lucky to reach the spirit wheel level, and it's very difficult to reach a higher level. When I get there, it will be easier for me to break through and I can accompany your majesty more. The two of them circled around and returned to the temporary palace. Your majesty, let's rest. Rinpoche said as he put his arm around the Empress's waist. Aren't you going to sleep in the outer room? The Empress squinted her eyes and looked at him. My kidneys aren't weak anymore. I think we can continue to make babies. Rinpoche laughed. He had no choice as the Empress was too alluring. If he were to sleep with her on the same bed, he was afraid that his old waist wouldn't be able to take it. I'm already pregnant with a child. The Empress took off her red veil and hung it on the rack. Huh. Rinpoche's eyes widened. This was only one time. Fine, it was one big time and there were many small times in between. But how could it be so fast? And you already know that in just a few days? Of course, I know my body well. The Empress looked a little shy. When I was on Earth, I already knew that if I wanted to conceive a child, I had to control ovulation. I could still do this little trick, and at that time, I also borrowed the effect of the first dual cultivation. Rinpoche was dumbstruck. He had never heard that one could master such a technique after practicing. This had never been written in any of the Shenxia or Xuanhua novels. Besides, didn't the Aboriginals have difficulty reproducing? In terms of self-control, there aren't many people in this world who can compare to me, the Empress casually said after hearing Ren Baqian's question. Ren Baqian felt that the Empress was indeed a cheat. Not only was his cultivation speed fast, his cultivation base was also rising every day. Apart from watching television dramas and drinking, his control over his body was also far superior to others. If those who trained their bodies every day were to find out about this, they would probably want to die. His mind was in a mess like a herd of wild horses. After a while he came back to his senses. The Empress was pregnant? He was going to be a father? Oh my God, I wasn't even mentally prepared for this. Oh, how could he be a father? How could it be so fast? He had just gotten married and hadn't brushed his teeth yet. Ren Baqian lay on the bed in a daze. He slowly calmed down as he smelled the delicate fragrance of the Empress. If she was pregnant, then so be it. He was going to be a father. He originally felt that this was a distant matter, but he didn't expect it to happen so soon. As for how to raise the child, he didn't need to worry about this. Wouldn't it take at least 9 or 10 months for a child to be born? He should be able to prepare after such a long period of time. Well, wasn't it 9 months for the Aboriginals to give birth? He had to ask tomorrow. Not long after, the Empress grabbed Ren Baqian's mischievous hand. What are you doing? I'm just touching. Aren't you just touching? I'm just rubbing. Creak, creak, creak. Not long after, the wooden couch began to creak, and it became more and more intense. Hey, be gentle, Your Majesty. You're still calling me Your Majesty? It's better to call me Your Majesty. Ren Baqian groaned. Compared to a name, he preferred to call her Your Majesty. The sense of accomplishment of hugging the monarch of a nation was overflowing. Aren't you the wildest horse? Boom. The couch collapsed again. The red curtain was like a ball of flame rolling in the room. Isn't Her Majesty going to court again? Many officials who were waiting in front of the palace heard the news from Xinjia and whispered to each other. In particular, those who entered the palace yesterday wanted to bring up some things in court today, but didn't expect to hear this news. Where is Her Majesty? Hongwu asked with a frown. Get lost. Xinjia's answer was full of realism, and these 3 words described the scene vividly. After finishing her sentence, she cupped her hands at everyone and turned to return to the palace. Only the crowd was left with a blank look on their faces. After all, they didn't know what getting lost meant. That night, there was a rumble in the palace. Qing Yuan and Hong Wan rushed over to take a look and were on the verge of tears. Her Majesty's temporary resting place had collapsed again. Why was it faster than the previous time? Where's Her Majesty? Her Majesty has gone to Chongqing Palace. Xinjia appeared beside them and said faintly. Another day passed. Many officials stood in front of the palace and waited for the news that the Empress wouldn't be attending court today. Shi Qing's expression changed for a long time before he finally laughed bitterly. After a day of not having morning court, everyone roughly understood what was going on. This was already the 2nd time this had happened. Why do I feel that? Zhao Prince Consort is harming the nation. Tong Xinye smacked his lips. The surroundings were instantly cleared. Although he wasn't the only one who had this thought, everyone immediately distanced themselves from him. That night, following the sound of collapse, Xinjia stood in front of the ruins of Chongqing Palace. Her eyes flickered with uncertainty, and she had a strange expression on her face. It was as if she was curious. A red shadow drilled into an empty palace and wriggled on the ground like a red cocoon. We can't stay in the palace anymore. 2 of the palaces have collapsed. What should we do? Ren Baqian panted heavily. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.